Wow.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance joint hearings on the 2012 fiscal year budget. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm going to ask our Town Facilities Commission, Mr. Al Kelly, to lead us in the pledge tonight.
Just a moment of silence for those that are over serving us in the military. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Also, we might remember this evening the victims of the terrible ongoing tragedies over in Japan. I know all of us send out our heartfelt hopes and prayers for them and for what that country's going through. At this point tonight, the agenda has been updated from the original posted agenda for this evening. First, we're going to hear from the Town Facilities Commission on the capital improvement projects, several of the capital improvement projects that were included in the budget request for 2012. Mr. Al Kelly will represent the Town Facilities Committee, who undertook a review at the request of the Board of Selectmen, which was done earlier this month. In addition, tonight we have a question and answer format on the administrative and general departments for the town. We're going to hear about the Board of Selectmen's office, the First Selectman's office, administrative services, registrar of voters, zoning board of appeals, town planning and zoning, probate court, historic district commission, conservation, shellfish, legal services, miscellaneous contingencies, human resources, community and economic development, harbor management, land acquisition, and then we've got a couple of holdover items on our contingency account, and I'm going to ask Mr. Hiller to walk us through our debt schedules for the debt area. Also, just in the administrative and general area, I'm going to ask that we take the human resources area first. Why? Because these have several of our large balances that have been debates amongst this board for not just this budget season, but for prior budget seasons. And it's a very complicated area regarding insurance reserves, and we're going to tackle that after the capital improvement discussion this evening. So that's the state of play, the agenda for tonight. Any questions, comments from board members before I turn it over to Mr. Kelly? Anyone? All right. So welcome, Mr. Kelly, and thank you. Yes. We should note that we just were handed a copy of the Town Facilities Commission report. You only had this assignment, Mr. Kelly. Your board only had the assignment for how long?
Mr. Flato gave this the assignment, I want to say a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so it was.
We were able to meet last Wednesday or Thursday, I can't even remember what day it is, and this is Monday, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we were able to we were able to put this together. I'm sorry for the short notice, but did the best we could.
Yeah, so it was done quite quickly, and that's the reason we're only getting it tonight. But obviously, since we're just getting it, forgive board members if they're taking a few minutes to read it as we go through it tonight. Typically, we like to get things in advance so that we have more time to read it, but we know you guys did the best you could this time, so thank you under tight circumstances. So, Mr. Brockfield, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Precisely.
Oh, okay. Mr. Tetro, anything?
Mr. Chair, I did actually catch my email this afternoon. I want to compliment the TFC for how they laid out the response. As you turn to the back pages, they made it very easy to follow point by point their recommendation and what they're saying. So I just want to compliment them in giving us something to very clearly lay out what their recommendations were.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Seeing nothing else, thank you, Mr. Kelly, and thank the committee for their work.
Thank my wife for letting me come out tonight.
Always.
See you Friday. That was her comment. Okay. Love you, honey. Well, we were asked to look at several Board of Ed projects, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, because what we did is we took Mr. White's DPW stuff first, because he had fewer items, just so that he didn't have to go through all the Board of Ed items that were much more monumental in terms of quantity of items to be looked at, not necessarily as one being more important than another. So if you'd be kind enough to turn to 3 of 14 of your facilities report, it says town projects for the TFC. Of course, we didn't number the ones that were given to us by the charge from the first selectman, but we have it hopefully in order here, and just bear with me. This is the part that I wanted to vet a little bit more and wasn't able to, as far as lining things up. But I want to thank also the members of the Town Facilities Commission, the ones that are here. Mr. Gallagher's here, Mr. Saponis here. I don't have a mirror, but the efforts that they put in over the weekend, last week, to help this body and the Board of Selectmen hopefully shows in this report. I am not alone on this. So the first project, Mr. White came to us with regards to the Oldfields roof. The original roof, 45,000 square feet, is past its useful life, and he came up with a budget number of about $1 million to replace it. That was his presentation item. Subsequent to that, he did a little more research, and in the report, you'll see that he found that actually one roof is 30 years old, the one he's having all the trouble with over there at the senior center, and that's leaking profusely, and the other one was only 20 years old and actually looked better. He actually brought a couple of roofing companies out, and as you know, and he's fairly thorough about how he worked you through it, and by his due diligence and checking with town records and actually finding the age, they're going to monitor the existing roof. You'll probably hear this from him again tonight, but they're going to monitor the roof that they're not going to do, and they're only going to do the half of the building that's 30 years old plus, and which brought the number down to the recommended amount of $478,000. And I think if you see through the report, you'll see we used the number of 2450. We vetted that with a couple of estimators and a roofing contractor, so that number just didn't come out of thin air. And that would include abatement, and that would include the new roof, and making sure that's from the contractor. We also added in actually an architect for the contract documents so that they can bid it properly and get the 3 quotes that they're going to need to do the work over there. And part of that number would be also the architect coming out to supervise the installation work. So that'll be supervise the arc. That'll bring up punch lists, making sure the roof is being installed properly. And we felt as the commission that's in the best interest of the town. That's item number 1. Do you want to go item by item and have questions on it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, and to your entire team, your commission. My question on this one is the updated recommended funding request a result of any increased use of Public Works manpower?
The updated number is, no, it's not,
It's not.
except Mr. White's time.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just still curious on this 2450 a square foot. so
Yes.
you know. I mean, we started at 21, and I thought that was high.
The range is 2150 to 2550, and that's because right now the unknown we have is abatement. And that's why that number, and I actually told Mr. White, I said, look, you know, you could have asbestos issues there that you're going to have to contend with for the abatement, and that's why that number was chosen.
Okay, but, so part of this price per square foot is due to an unknown?
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Okay. So how much did you put in per square foot for the abatement, do you know?
It's not broken out that way because we don't know that yet. He's got to get testing done, and that's part of this funding process. I mean, that's part of this request. He's actually got to go out and take a whole bunch of samples and then get them all tested, and we did not have time to get all that done for at least our meeting. I don't know where Rich stands with it now, but that's part of it.
Okay. Just a question on the vendors that we're choosing. How do we go about that? And I guess that could be said for any project.
The process is very simply that we get the fund that you approve. Yes, we're gonna fund it this year, and then they'll have an architect draw up plans and specifications for the details around the edgings, the weather strippings, anything that they see needs to be replaced, and the roof itself and the specifications, and they'll put that out to public bid. And they'll pick, what we do is normally pick the lowest bidder.
Okay, so since it's out for public bid, then, anybody that sees it, reads about it, can bid on this too?
I think Ms. Holland is qualified bidders. They are going to be vetted. It won't be just anybody USA, it'll be a qualified bidder.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Questions, comments? Mr. White, do you have any other comments on this item? I'm sorry, let me go to Mr. White first, and then I'll have Mr. DeWitt. Did I miss you, or did you raise your hand? Okay.
You coming up?
Oh, I never look at you.
Let me move my screen over.
Well, that's why it's blending.
Yeah, things are going pretty good. I was afraid to open up my mouth, but I just felt that I owed you an explanation. I mean, I started off with $1 million project, and it went down quite a lot, and there was a question of the condition of the two sections of the roof. And we prepared this estimate or this budget during around the week of Thanksgiving, whenever that is, in November. And our intent was to, because we had a previous report that indicated that, both roofs had some problems, but they were of different age, and we weren't sure. We knew that the school was closed in 78 to 81, so we knew we were at least that age. Plus, we figured that it's reasonable to figure they didn't do much on the roof towards the end of its lifespan. So our intent was to get up on the roof, walk around, take the core samples, et cetera. But we obviously got into the beginning of December. There was a little procrastination there for a couple weeks, and then the snow hit, and we couldn't get back on the roof until it melted. So we got back up there. We saw two different conditions. The area that leaked bad was really deteriorated. That area that's cross-section there. The other looked like it was definitely of a new generation. But then again, we couldn't piece it together. And we did some homework with Paul's help, looking through the past RTM resolutions, et cetera, and found to our surprise, pleasant surprise, that the school put together a project in 91, which seems a little unusual that they would put a roof on an old building that they abandoned, but they obviously did it in anticipation of making it into the senior center. So that gave us the dates, and we felt very comfortable that it was around 20 years old, which is certainly new enough to just continue to monitor for the next few years. So hence the reduction of the scope of the project.
Thank you. Mr. Hiller?
I'll just add to what Mr. White said. We did find, as he indicated, that there was bonding done for this roof, along with, there were several other school roofs. I don't have the list. Mr. Collins is probably aware of it. They were done at the same time in 91. I know the Board of Education has been looking at those roofs, but those were the roofs, that portion of the building was done in 91
Okay.
as part of there are probably about 5 or 6 schools, including this one.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kelly, to follow up on Mr. Brown's point,
Yes.
and on the rate, and the last line that says, discussion among TFC members recognize that the estimate for this roof replacement may be too low, since no contingencies were included. Aren't you really taking contingency up in the rate per square foot?
I don't believe so.
I'm a little confused with that, because we were at 2150, you said before. 2450, your range is 2150 to 2550. You decided to go to 2450 because you're not quite sure about abatement, I get that.
Right.
And you don't think that's the contingency?
That was, I vetted this with 2 other estimators and a roofing contractor, and they agreed that you don't know what the circumstances, we don't know the level of, first, the abatement issue, yes, but the level of roof decay underneath all the leaks, They said this is a big, big issue, and also the contingency is partly for that as well, to make sure that there's going to be enough money, that we're not coming back and Rich runs out of money to do this. Because they won't know until they start ripping
So-
the roof out.
So at 10%, you're only 530,000, give or take, rounding up, right? That's what I got.
I took 432.
Well, I see 470, I just added 10% to 478. I guess 5285, but
I took the
5258, sorry.
430, I took the 435.
Yeah, it's the 435 plus 10%, isn't that what you?
Yeah, that's what I did, plus 10%.
The 478 is the all-in number, including a 10% contingency.
Oh, that's with the contingent, oh,
10% on top of the 435 is 478.
okay, so why is there, okay, so now I'm confused. So,
But, okay, me too, all right, it's fine, go ahead, let's,
so contingency is included in this number?
yes,
I went right to the bottom line at 478. and I
that's
was
with
right.
the contingency in it.
That's with the contingency, all right. All right, thanks, I misread, sorry.
It's all right. It has to
Mr.
be every day.
Tetra,
Just as we saw this, it says we're doing 16,400 square feet with this.
Yes,
All right, and was that just the shaded area on the diagram that we were looking at?
yes,
So what's the total square footage for the entire roof?
45,000 square feet,
Okay, so this is just over a third.
yes,
So let me rephrase that then. For about half the cost, we're getting a third of the roof done.
that's correct.
Okay. So that says that had we done everything, this would be closer to $1.5 million as opposed to
That's
$1
correct.
million.
We would have had to vet that a little higher, yes, sir.
Right. And then again, just partially for me and partially for the public, I guess, just to be clear on, and maybe Mr. Hiller, you can confirm that what we're doing here, we're basically defining an overall number that'll go out and get quoted on based on what it costs us to do this. We'll fund that, but we're not bonding $478,000. We're bonding whatever it actually costs, hopefully under that somewhat. So in essence, we won't approve this money and get it back. We just won't spend it if we don't need it on the project. So if this comes in at 450, we're only going to bond the 450. We're only going to spend the 450. We're only going to bond the 450. This will only come back to us if for some reason the bids come in or the work comes in over 478.
Correct.
We would probably, and this will hold for all of the items that are on this agenda tonight. And I might also add this, I also got late this afternoon, had 2 phone conversations with bond counsel who will be here Wednesday evening. I have the draft bond resolution on all of the projects, which has certain wording in it, which is modified a little bit, and we think in keeping with what the board had asked. Bond counsel will be here, as I said, to address those issues. We would issue bond anticipation notes on all of these projects this summer. On a project like this, which will more than likely be done before the end of the calendar year, we would probably issue pretty much the full amount as far as a bond anticipation note, realizing there's some risk on it. And I think it's really in keeping in what we've done in the past. I've talked to both Mr. White and Mr. Cullen and say, how soon are we going to need this money? Because we would then go to a more permanent type bonding on this in the summer of 2012. So we might, just so that we've got enough cash for cash flow purposes, we'd probably go up almost right to the edge on this and say, usually we'll talk in terms of $5,000 increments. So we might be borrowing $475 on this if we take their recommendation.
Thank you.
any other questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item number 2, the underground storage tanks.
The underground storage tanks were presented by Mr. White again, by the DPW. We explained within that, there were, I think if we look at page 6 of 14, I'll go right to that. He has a monitoring system for fire station number 2. Now, these tanks are for the diesel fuel, for the most part, at least the fire station, Smith Richardson, are for fuel for trucks and vehicles. So there's a little bit different regulations, and I need to say that because as we go forward, you'll see that the fuel oil, there's a few fuel oil tank issues which have different regs. And I'll go through that when we get to those items. For the fire station and Smith Richardson, Rich White's recommending that we put in two monitoring systems to make sure the tank levels don't change, and that is compliant with the DEP for regulations, and he had all the documentation to substantiate those numbers with, I think, 1 or 2% charge, upcharge on last year's number, just a small smidgen up. So that's where the 40,000 for the fire station number 1 comes from for their fuel tank, and the Smith Richardson Golf Course, the same thing for their maintenance vehicles, 40,000. For the Burr Homestead and the Tunxus Hill Garage, now Tunxus Hill's the one that's across, it's the old DPW building, the garage there that we inherited about a decade ago now. And that tank's just got to be removed. They're running on natural gas right now. So we're just trying to get that tank out. You'll see that number is quantified in there. And then the fuel tank for Burr Homestead, they're going to remove the fuel tank that's there. That's, I hope, and I think he's going to put in a smaller in-building tank. Or is it natural gas, Rich? He's going to put a tank, like a home-style fuel tank in the basement, so there's no more buried tank there. So both of them are removals. The other one's like a 275? Rich? A 275-gallon tank?
Sounds right.
All right, 275-gallon tank is basically what most houses have. They're going to put that in the basement, and that's going to be the replacement to this. So this is these are mostly remediation fuel oil tanks for replacement, like a house one. They're, probably $1,500 is worked into the number for that. So having said that, the other thing is he's going to be putting in double insulated walls, which is a DEP regulation from the existing fuel tank over at Oldfield into the building, and you see that note for $5,000. And the TFC recommends that you accept these at $120,000.
The
Questions,
total-
comments?
I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
It says 120,000 here, but those don't total that. They total 105, so I'm wondering what the missing 20 is.
We put in a contingency on top of that, and I didn't write that in.
And the replacement tank is included in the 20 for the Burr Homestead?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Tetro, Mr. Bolito.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if now is the time when you want to discuss this, but we had a question on item A, I think, for fire station. I think Mr. DeWitt pointed out that we approved this expenditure, and I believe it was expended last year.
Correct.
So the question is, can this board expend it again this year, or it's not a TFC question. That's why I was asking if if the chair wanted to get into this discussion at this point. I think we'd ask that question. Somebody's going to get some material back to us at some point.
That's where I was thinking.
Go ahead, Mr. Hill.
I think that's a question, and that's why there's a modification of the previous language in here as far as tying the dollars to specific projects.
Was the dollar, I think the first question was, in last year's bond resolution, was it specifically tied to this fire station, or did it just say a fire station, or what did it say?
And part of this, I think, is an answer also for Wednesday night for bond counsel, as far as clarification on that and his interpretation of that.
Bond resolution.
And
Mr. Chair?
he'll be prepared to answer that.
Yeah, Mr. Tetra.
Just to follow on with that, I think that there are two separate issues here. Not to complicate the bond resolution or complicate the bonding process. If folks will lend us money just because we're going to spend a lot, that's okay. But in terms of the charter, and this town and this board, knowing that what we approved the money for, what we got the cost justification for, what was described to this board as the use of the money, was what we spent it on, it seems like we may need a separate, what I'll call appropriations resolution, separate from the bond resolution. We keep trying to do it and use one set of words, but I'm going to say roughly every year we get caught on this somehow. So my suggestion would be that we ask for a appropriations resolution to come along with this that clearly describes what we authorized the money to be spent on. We can also approve the bond resolution, which says, here's where you go get the revenue to spend it on this. But I think that's the only way we're going to be able to tie it back to what was presented to us, what the cost justification was, and to some degree what we approved. So that would be my recommendation for whenever we get to the appropriation part of this, that in fact there be a separate appropriation.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, the follow-up on Mr. Tetro's point, I have the capital improvement projects from last year, and, I mean, they're painfully detailed. I mean, if you lifted this one paragraph for $180,000 of underground fuel storage tanks out and dropped it into bond resolution, there would be no disputing this, you know. Fire Station 1, 2, and 5, Fire Station 1, Fire Station 2, and 5, and how much each one is. So, and it was clear that Fire Station 2, fuel monitoring systems and fuel protection, flow protection, were installed at $40,000. So, I mean, do we even know if that bond, we don't know how the bond was written, I guess is the point.
Well, I don't have a copy of it in front of me. I'm asking Mr.
Nor-
Hillard.
nor do
I had
I.
asked that someone go back and look at it.
Yeah, and it's written essentially on those lines. It does not specify, it talks about underground storage tanks.
So it did not specify.
It did not specify
the specific
specifically,
underground storage
boom,
tank.
boom, 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 boom.
Okay, so
and I
Mr.
think-
Hillard,
Like the very words
Mr.
in here.
White can probably,
Mr. Hillard, to the first part of the question then that Mr. Tetro raised, it wouldn't appear, since it was specific, that we have a legal issue with appropriating, or rather bonding for the same thing again, since the bond resolution was not specific and that it was going towards
it was
this
more
fire station.
generic to underground storage tanks.
Okay. To the second point, on a go-forward basis, and I would ask Mrs. Stenix here, for the Board of Selectmen, if you would consider, I like the idea of having a separate appropriation and then the bonding resolution, because that does get to the point of.
It's spent on what it should be spent on.
Yeah, exactly. So I would ask that if you wouldn't mind speaking to your colleagues for Wednesday's meeting, so that when it comes to us on Wednesday night, perhaps we can do it in that manner. And moving forward, we don't have to futz with the bond appropriation. I don't know that that's the technical term, but, so we don't have to mess with that. But we can get it in the appropriation and then do the appropriate bond resolution. Mr. White, you came up, I'm assuming you have something you'd like to say.
You just came up early.
Yeah, I think my boss was going to speak to this issue in terms of its charge. And the only other point I'd make that if, because I understand clearly what you're saying.
Sure.
And if,
Speak of the devil.
here, good. Good.
He doesn't even know.
Go ahead.
Oh, the second issue was that if the board or the, a better description from the bond council indicates that it needs to be, it was inappropriate, it just gets charged back to the town side of the budget. I mean, it is correctable, in other words.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Mr. Flater, we're talking about bond resolutions and oil tanks and the issue we had with last year's budget. I think it's something that we can talk about later. We can move on now.
I know there
and come
was
back.
one tank where Rich had an emergency, and from my perspective at the time, because the resolution was oil tank replacements, I felt very comfortable giving him the go-ahead to do it. Happy to talk about it, but it was an emergency, and
Yeah, I don't think anyone debates that the work probably needed to be done, particularly if it was an emergency, and certainly if Mr. White said it had to be. But it
Yeah.
was just
I mean, if it was something other than oil tanks, it would have been a different discussion.
legalese
but
of doing
se-
it.
It seemed like but I know Eileen, I don't know if Paul, I know they were going to look at the language to see how definitive that was, because
Yeah.
I didn't, at the time, we were just talking about oil tanks, and things said oil tanks, and so I'm not sure if that was re-reviewed or not.
Now, let's, we don't need to go through this again, because we just did it. So
Okay.
let's, we'll catch you up. I know
Okay.
you had a prior
Yep,
commitment that
thank
kept you a few
Thanks
minutes
for your
late.
patience.
Any other questions, comments on this item? Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the exception of C, all the other items seem to indicate there is no immediate environmental danger. So basically, you're talking about compliance with regulations. What would the consequence be if we did nothing?
We stand the chance that at any given time, the state, we know the state regulator or person that's in charge of our town, and he does make, I wouldn't say frequent visits, at least once a year he shows up. He is aware of these issues. He is aware that the town does a good job in terms of methodically moving to correct its problems. It could go either way. I mean, if he decided that, you know, that they were on our list, which he's aware of, and we didn't move on them, then he can issue a violation. I'm not sure what the penalties are for that.
Okay. Well, that would be interesting to know, because if it's, you know, pay a fine, you know, if it's a significant fine, then obviously it might behoove us to do this work now. But if it's a process rather than an immediate fine, maybe it's something we could delay by a year. That's why I'm curious to know about that. It's also ironic that with C, which is the one that does have the potential for contamination, that we bought the Tungus Hill Garage or inherited it from the state, and yet the state might be fining us for contamination. So it's interesting how that works.
Always two different divisions.
Yeah,
That's why we got it for $1.
exactly. Buyer beware. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go to Mr. DeWitt, and then I think I saw Mr. Tetra. Is that correct?
Just curious, Mr. Kelly, what's in your 13% contingency on this one?
Soil contamination.
You all set, Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah.
We'll go to Mr. Tetra.
Do we know what these tanks are, what's the material for these tanks?
Steel, they're steel.
They're all steel?
Well, these two are here, but later on, there's another one that's fiberglass.
When you say these two, which
Well,
ones?
there was another one in the Board of Ed stuff that's fiberglass, but these are steel.
Okay, there's A, B, C, and D here.
These are steel.
Everything on this page is steel.
Yes, sir.
So you've got the issue, especially for the older ones, of possible corrosion, as possible damage to the steel.
Yes, sir.
As opposed to the fiberglass, where it's less likely to corrode. I think that may be part of the risk factor
Yeah, it could be
of
leaking.
leaving them in the ground.
Could be just, you know, that's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, let's go to item number 3. Old Academy Building, the roof
You
replacement.
better stay for this one. Let me get this out of there. Use Discreta. Mr. White met with us with respects to the Old Academy Building, and it's a roof replacement and a cupola repair, and I'm going to let him, as he so eloquently told us the other night, explain it in laborious detail.
I think we did explain it to us. We already had the
Oh,
explanation.
well then, we...
know why your number's different.
Yeah.
Because when we looked at it, we were concerned about the cupola repairs and bringing a crane on site to have to pull it off and have which Rich said his guys are going to do the intricate work to bring it back up to historical standards, or keep it at historical standards, correct? Because the Historical Society is involved in this. So, the Historical Society has a big say in that, and that's what we were concerned with, that they would have enough money to do that.
So this is purely for meeting?
Part of a contingency, really.
Okay.
Mr. White.
And if I could, in particular, relating to the cupola, if I remember the discussion, that part of the building is pretty unique, or?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? All right. Oh, Mr. Brown?
This job, this particular job is not a prevailing wage job, then, correct? Like, could you,
Because
because it's under $100,000.
Be under $100,000 is estimated.
But it's still, what, it's a 3,000 square foot roof?
Yes.
And we still think it's going to be in the high 20s to get this done? 28, 20-something, that?
Yes, sir.
The one I reached out to was, and again, it's just an estimate, Antonelli Roofing Company was a low bidder on Old Town Hall, which we did recently. And I just asked them for an estimate for this one here. That was his estimate.
$85,000.
Again, plans and specs are prepared, and anyone can bid on it.
Right. You know, I'll
Cedar
be
roof, right?
interested to see how these bids come back, if I can somehow. I don't know where I'll get the information from, but,
We can supply that,
okay. With the bid as it goes out, and then the responses.
exactly.
Great, thank you.
Rich, tell him how long the roof is going to last. Cedar shingles, right?
Yes,
How long is it going to last?
35, 40.
35, 40 years for the cedar shingles?
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? All right, seeing none, go to item number 4. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you.
Mr. White Elementary School boiler replacement.
We met with Mr. Cullen. He presented us with documentation for boiler replacement on 4 or 5 different boiler plants that had recently been done, the highest of which was $215,000. In that number, it was, I forget which school it was that he did that in, but it was similar to the Dwight project. And we took the number, we thought 315 was a bit high, and we took his number, added a contingency to it, and that's where we came up with 280,000 to do the boiler replacements. It added in a little contingency, but that was the consensus. Some wanted to go a lot lower, some wanted to go a lot higher. I said, look, we got to come to an agreement on it. Where our concern mostly is not giving them enough money to replace the boilers based on the documentation that they presented to us.
Okay, questions, comments? Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I was unclear about is your recommendation, is that for the Viessmann boilers or not?
Those are the preferred boilers, and the
Okay.
specification will be written around those boilers, and then they're going to have to vet that process when they actually bid it.
Right. Now, from what when we took the tour at Jennings, we were talking about this stuff, and I forget whether it was Mr. Coleman or Mr. Morabito was talking about these boilers, and they've had good experience with them in terms of efficiency. My question is, given the fact that it's foreign-made, are we going to have an issue with parts down the line and maintenance down the line?
We asked that question. There's still, even American boilers are sometimes 24 to 48 hours out, but the boilers are built, and they do have warehouses and stuff here, so.
Okay.
We weren't totally adverse to using that type of boiler. It's German.
Right.
It's a good product. What can I say? They make good stuff over there.
And down the line, I saw, and it was interesting that you put it about the economies of scale and standardization of the boiler equipment. I took that to mean that you want to see, where possible, the same equipment being used throughout the system so that when you need parts, you can buy just more than one part for one boiler. You can kind of
Well, we
stockpile
talked
them.
about that as well. The issue is those boilers will be different sizes depending on the school, no matter what you do. And
Sure.
it's going to be hard to standardize and have like a in-house stock of parts for
Right.
repairs. But they can get them within a reasonable amount of time, so.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Mr. DeWitt?
Mr. Kelly, what do we put in Stratfield School? What boilers?
We put one Viessmann and an A.L. Smith, I believe.
Thanks. Thank you.
Can I, quick one for myself. Maybe I'm just reading this wrong. Again, we just got the document.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. That wasn't a,
There was 3 emails from the first selectman. Where is it? Where is it?
the TFC discussed the recent replacement of 2 similar boilers at O Field by DPW for $146,000.
Correct.
$145,800.
That's correct.
So this request is $280,000
That's correct.
for 2 boilers as well.
That's correct.
So help me with the math here, and why are we paying double?
Well, it's not quite double, is it? I mean, we're a little under that. Well, that's why we knocked it down to 280,000. They had other documentation that said higher numbers with them, so that's why, this was, like I said, we as the commission said, this is the number that we would be comfortable recommending. Should this body decide to do a little lower,
Were they, well,
I think we need to, Mr. Cullen needs to come up for a minute.
yeah, and I see Mr. White came back into the room, and I'm about to ask him as well.
But I think, since I was part of their meeting last week, as you know, I got here late, I think Tom has some good, there was some very lengthy discussion about a different kind of boiler that the school district was seeking than the one we put in the old field. So I think it
So you're saying they're dissimilar?
I think there are some
Yeah,
differences, and I
they are.
think they discussed
they're-
that at the TFC, and the TFC members recognize that, so.
Oh, between Oldfield and yes, there are dissimilar, there are issues. That's why Tom's number that he gave us that, for the documentation, was based on excuse me, how do you pronounce that word? Wiesmann?
Viesman.
Wiesmann boilers.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Cullen, thank
Good
you.
evening. You're welcome.
Go ahead.
I don't have anything else to add on the boiler project.
Well, okay, thank
You
you.
want to explain?
Uh,
Could I,
Other than answer your question that the two schools are different, the burners are different, size of the boilers will be different.
How different are they? I mean, why are we quoting Oldfield in here for $145,000 for two?
I can't answer that.
Well, because we talked about it.
You know,
It was one of the numbers that we talked about. That's why it's in there.
but if I could try to help a little, just to maybe.
Yeah, please, somebody.
Avoid prolonging the agony. Do you want to maybe just describe how the boilers versus Stratfield School, I mean, you talked about a few different scenarios and how these boilers are pretty different than the Oldfield ones. Do you want to just give a 3-minute explanation as to what's different and more, I guess you said, energy efficient?
The major concern for the Facilities Commission was simply not providing enough in the bonding ratio. Some of our decisions were based on the following premise, that if they didn't spend it all, it wouldn't be bonded. That was part of our philosophy, because I look at the numbers, I understand they're German boilers, I understand what Mr. Cullen's point was. We tried to come to consensus on everything, not necessarily dictate to each other what we need or don't need. And I always ask Tom, is this number, can you do it for that number? Can we knock it down to this number? Can we knock it down? And as long as Tom said, yeah, we can do it for that, you'll see numbers are throughout are done. But that was the thinking process. Yes, we're a little higher on this, but, the best laid plans of mice and men do often go astray when you have these boiler replacement projects. So I can't,
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I guess what I'm having trouble with, since it's raised here, what is the difference between Dwight and Oldfield in terms of heating that would cause us to have to spend over $100,000 more for two boilers?
Could be asbestos abatement that was done in the boiler room. It's part of the project, the controls. That's all part of the package. I mean, we're not just snipping wires, cutting pipes, bringing in a new boiler and reconnecting it.
So is that what we did at Oldfield, is we just went in and snipped wires and didn't do a specimen?
Don't know that.
Mr. White, can you help us out here a little bit? I'm
come
having,
up and join the show. Can you do it for less?
are the buildings so dissimilar that you wouldn't have? Does anybody else have the same question that I have? Yeah. Okay.
When we put together the estimate for the Oldfield, one thing I remember is we had like 100,000 in there for asbestos abatement, and then it turned out to be less than 10,000. But the monitoring in that was another 8,000 or whatever. That was a real surprise to us. I don't know, we're way off on that. In terms of the boilers, we had a spec that we thought was good for what we wanted. We do recognize that the boilers that we put in, I would consider a Chevy compared to, a Cadillac version that the school has. Theirs is a much better boiler. I think there's a difference, and I would go along with that choice if I owned the two buildings, because the Oldfield is an old building with old pipes, and you're replacing basically the heart, but the arteries are still shot. And what we were looking at was putting in two boilers that would get the job done, certainly, but we were looking down the road to these split systems, literally, that would allow us to provide air conditioning and heat. They're basically these new heat pump systems that you can put in buildings. So we were looking at 5 years or so down the road, putting those in, perhaps, if the numbers made sense, and taking at least one or maybe two of these boilers, which were deliberately sectional and easy to move, and putting them in a couple of other locations where they would make sense. One where they would make sense would be Old Town Hall, which has a boiler coming to the end of its useful life, where we would shorten up the sections and put that one in there.
So you're saying the anomaly in this is not necessarily in the Dwight boilers, it's more so in the Oldfield boilers, where you went with a different type of boiler for a short-term period of time?
Correct.
And then you would repurpose that boiler into a different area or a different building?
That's what we were looking at. A Chevy that we could take apart and perhaps use in some of the other buildings, realizing that because it's the steam system and again, the arteries, the pipes, and the steam traps and that are really old and in tough shape. And we think that cost is so big that we needed to look at alternatives going down the road 5 years, and that's what we were looking at with our homework we did to date, realizing these heat pumps are much more advanced than they were before, and they made a good fit for providing both heat and air conditioning to that building in the future.
Just curious, do you guys know what the cost differential is? Forget the rest, the abatement and all that. What's the
Right.
cost differential on just the boilers themselves? Just the hard,
I don't know.
Between the Viessmann and the,
yeah.
no, we don't know that number. Believe it, 10.
Yeah.
You
Can
said
I,
mention 10
let's go to
each.
Mr. Bolito, who asked first, and then we'll go to Mr. DeWitt.
Ballpark figures, what's the square footage of Oldfield versus the square footage at Dwight? Is it about the same? Is one significantly larger than the other? Just to try to get a handle on this.
About the same.
They're about the same,
Yes, they
okay.
are, sir.
Does the fact that Oldfield is being used as a senior center and not a school impact the usage such that you could go with a smaller capacity boiler at Oldfield versus Dwight? Or is that not a factor
Well, I
at
don't
all?
think they went with smaller capacity boilers. I think they went with, they didn't go with the Viessmann product, which we had discussions at the TFC level the other night, and the number was bandied about $15,000 differential between the Viessmann and maybe an A.O. Smith in premium cost. So that'd be times two, that's the 30,000. And then we also, did I answer your question?
Yes, you are. Good, thank you.
Mr. DeWitt.
Last year's capital improvements says the boiler for Oldfield was going to cost $150,000 and $100,000 for abatement. That's what's in here. So is that not what, because this number says 145 for the
Right,
whole job.
He said the
No,
abatement.
we blew the abatement completely. We thought it was a much bigger task, and when we bid it, people came in, and we knew it wasn't, the guy wasn't doing it on the sly, because we had paid an industrial hygienist to watch him to make sure he did the correct job, and actually, because of the school situation, we went to that standard to monitor the asbestos, et cetera, the containment and everything. So he got the whole job done for $10,000 worth of abatement, probably $8,000 or $9,000 worth of monitoring. We just blew the estimate. We were way off.
So the total bill out the door was 145? Is that,
Approximately, yes.
okay.
So that, go ahead.
No, I'm just curious why a high estimate that you know from the Oldfield, 150 plus 100, isn't the estimate going in to this one?
Add the 30 grand for the difference in the boilers, and you come to the 280.
Okay, all right. But
Is that what
I'm-
it
I'm-
is?
I'm
'Cause
also,
that's what I was just saying.
Yeah, I was just running the numbers, and that's what we were penciling everyone in.
The 30.
We had the other 8 members of this, well, let's see, there was not all of us there. One of them's in, where is it, Grand Cayman or something like that? Shame on him. That's why they were reluctant to go any lower, because of those, the unknowns.
So what you're saying is, compared to the last year's project, you had 250 in there, plus 30 grand for the boilers.
Right, for the premium
Brings it
boilers.
to 280. And then last year, you didn't have any abatement issues, or you had small abatement issues, so you were down to the 147.
just as a side note, process-wise more than anything, I'm coming to the conclusion that we could use the bond resolutions from similar jobs for this year, last year's bond appropriations for this year's deliberations. Maybe that'll be a budget subcommittee item, but we're on like our third thing here where we could have used an old bond resolution to get us to real numbers, so we can go forward with that.
Yes, Ms. Stein?
I just want to make sure, I'm trying to understand this. Is it that the Wiesman boiler?
Yes.
Does it have a longer life expectancy? Because I know Mr. White said that he was looking at having it potentially for 5 or 10 years at Oldfield, hold on one second, and then, taking it out and putting it somewhere else, so it has more life expectancy than that, but is it that, or it's cost of maintenance, does it break down less, or, I'm assuming parts are not less expensive since it's not a domestic boiler?
The issue is that the Wiesman's going to be more fuel efficient, so the premium cost, you'll get that back over the life of the boiler. The cost is about the life, what's the right word I'm looking, life cycle, the length of life of the boiler itself isn't much different. And
more
we're
efficient.
stretching out some of these boilers, 30-plus years, some of them, so we expect to get the same out of that boiler.
Great.
And Mr. Stone, then Mr. Brockfeld.
What's the warranty on these? They're in a commercial building, really. Is there?
The warranty's usually a year, parts and labor. That's the general consensus, yeah. I think you can get extended warranties with some of these products for the boilers. I don't have enough I apologize, I don't have enough information on that right now in front of me.
Okay.
I didn't ask that question.
Yeah, it's-
Mr. Brockfeld?
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Quick question. One thing that's frustrating me just listening to this is that there's a lot of moving, and by the way, thank you so much to the TFC, by the way, for taking this job on. You guys have plenty of work to do, and I don't think there's a more professional group that comes before us than you guys, so thank you. But there's a lot of moving parts in almost all of these requests, and I would love to see a little more breakdown. And it's too late now, but for example, you say that it's going to save fuel. I mean, based on today's cost of whatever, oil, how much will we save annually over 5 years, 10 years, over the life of the, I mean, there has to be some justification for using the better.
Do you know that off the top of your head?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but we have that information.
Can we get that to you?
Sure, well, yeah.
We'll get that to you.
I mean, for what it's worth, just listening to the analogy, and it doesn't matter because it's an analogy, but, Chevy 20 years ago or 30 years ago wasn't a really great car. Today, Chevys are pretty great cars.
So it's Chrysler.
So it just doesn't strike me as being necessarily a critical thing for us to go from Chevy to Cadillac, at least the way I think of Chevy to Cadillac are today. So I think we need to see that there are real cost savings here in order to justify a higher cost. Plus the potential, in spite of what you're saying, of, the issue of being foreign versus domestic, so the parts and so forth.
Do you know what is there any abatement, there's asbestos abatement involved in this? Do you know what the?
Wait, one
oh,
second. It's, Mr. Morbido just handed me the warranties. 10 years on the Wiesman. It's a 10-year warranty.
Better than one.
Huh?
Better than one.
I'm sorry, Sherry.
I'm just wondering what the breakdown was of the cost of the boilers and the abatement, what we were estimating.
We didn't have the breakdown for the asbestos, because we didn't pay a company to come in and do the work, to bid out the boilers, or look at the asbestos, take samples, give us the cost per square foot and all of that.
Okay.
Part of the 215 has got the abatement that we started out with was, the abatement was worked into that number, and then we've added the premium cost to it. So we're working with Rich's numbers to make sure, because if there's more abatement or less abatement, that's where we came with the numbers.
What would the high end, or the high end be for the abatement, do
They
you
weren't
think?
broken down in the documents
You
that we
wouldn't
had.
have
We
any,
just had
okay.
lump sum numbers on the boiler projects that we were looking at in similar size capacities.
What was it for the other boiler?
For
It was
Rich's-
18, but he estimated 100, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. Fear, you never know with the abatement issues.
Do you know offhand, if I could just follow up on that, the worst case in the last few years in any other school, I don't know if, I'm trying to remember with Stratfield if we had any abatement, but any of the other schools have any big abatement to give you a sense of that?
Well, big abatement like $100,000, no.
So
But
it's-
abatement, yes.
Well, the
They've all had
But-
abatement.
Let's think it off the.
The
But wait a
boiler-
second. There's one thing I don't understand. If you look at the boiler project that they did last year, it was $147,000, of which $10,000 was abatement. So you back that off and it becomes $136,000, right? And then you turn around and we just were told that it's $30,000 more, $15,000 each for each boiler. So if you take the 136, you add 30, that's 166, right?
Right.
Okay. The total budgeted price here was originally 315. It's now down to 280, right, if you take the TFC's example. Wouldn't that mean that the abatement and the ancillary items are, of the 280, about 120 or 114, whatever that number works out to be?
But we started with higher, the numbers that Mr. Cullen provided us with other boiler projects, not just Mr. White's. We had other,
Included piping, controls, and other work in the boiler room. And I
and
think
that's where the number
you
started.
did at Oldfield.
The number started at 215. And that's where we can, okay, then we started at
No, it
215.
started at 315.
I apologize. I was talking about the meeting I was at the other night, which was, we started at 215 and then added to that a contingency abatement, and then we came about 280 from there, and that's where everyone was like,
So for the piping and everything
yeah,
else,
yeah. So
you
our
brought
number,
it
we
up.
looked at the sheet, that the numbers that were provided, and we were, as we were vetting doing the vetting process, that's how we derived, okay, this is, I mean, I was one of those that wanted to go a little lower and could not get a consensus to do that.
So the 215 was before abatement, so really
Correct.
what you're saying in here is about $65,000
Right.
for abatement.
That's correct. And, you know, maybe we could tweak it another 10 down, but I was saying, well, the worst thing that could happen is that we come ask you for money and then it's not enough, and then we're going
I
to come back
understand.
through
No,
the
no,
process,
thank
and it holds up the boiler, and it's got to be done in the summer, and it's a school, and blah, blah, blah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for clearing that up. Any other questions, comments on this item? What I would suggest, we're going pretty long on these items. For the items where the TFC and the Education Administration have agreed, you know, and unless people need to hear a lot about them, we'll bring them up, talk briefly, and move them along. And then where there's items of disagreement, shall we say, let's hear that out, okay? Is that okay with everybody? Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So the next item is Howland Hill Elementary School. The oil tank replacement was 125, and it is the recommendation of the TFC that it's 125.
Right. Mr. Cullen provided the documentation for other projects of similar cost and value.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen.
Do we want Tom?
and
would it be
the-
all right
the
maybe
only-
if
the
Tom-
only
there'll
discussion-
probably be
Go ahead.
questions back and forth, maybe just have Tom join
Yeah, do you wanna
Al the
just
whole-
stay?
Kind of like what
I
Rich
just,
did.
it's okay. I mean, I can
Okay.
go from here.
All right.
If we do have to bring
Whatever
Tom
you
up,
guys
you
would
don't
like.
mind. So having said that, the only question we had on this for you to think and ponder over is an operational issue. And that is, do we want to put another 10,000-gallon tank in there, and that's out of our purview? Well, right now, we're saying, okay, that's the operational procedure of the town, 10,000-gallon oil tanks. It's a one-stop drop. That's because the truck pulls up, they drop all their oil, and they drive away. It's also for longevity. However, they've been burning mostly natural gas, but that's operational, and I think that's out of the TFC's purview as to how you want to go down that path or what you want to do. Okay, but these numbers were vetted, and we agreed with it. And this is the fiberglass tank, and it's got to come out.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll go on to Jennings
Can I ask a
Elementary
quick
School.
question, Mr. Flynn?
Yes, you can, Mr. Walsh.
So the issue becomes whether to do a $10,000 tank, which is you're requesting, or to do something smaller. If we did
Correct.
something smaller, what size could we go down to?
Well, the discussion at the TFC meeting was whether we would go down to possibly a 3,000-gallon tank
Yeah.
and have 1,000 gallons of oil in it. And the issue is becoming they're not burning the oil because they're burning natural gas. And then after a year or two, because of the type of product with the ethanol matched in, that degrades much quicker. It doesn't last as long as it used to, so now it's got to be treated, and it's the continual treatment, and then eventually it's got to be pumped out, and they got to dump new stuff in. So that's become an operational cost issue, so that I think the discussion really has to be, are you going to stay dual fuel? And then Mr. Cullen had mentioned one of the projects, one of the buildings, the high school, actually, the gas was off, and he walked in, flipped the switch, turned on the oil, was it, the middle school? The middle school, and brought the building up, and they didn't miss a day of school. So that's why it's important to have the dual fuel. The real question is, do you really need to have an in-ground storage tank to do it? And that, again, it's operational, because if you put in smaller tanks there and you stay with oil, you're going to be filling those puppies, all the time. I mean, you're going to be, instead of it going 2 months or 3 months and getting a really good drop or cost price for that on a bulk load, it's going to be, Ms. Holland told me all that a long time ago, so it becomes an issue.
What is the cost differential between a 3,000-gallon tank and a $10,000?
Approximately $7,000.
Not much.
Not much.
Okay? Yep.
Ms. Flynn, if I could follow up on that, but I think the dilemma I'm having is, I agree, I was surprised the small differential between the size of the tanks, but I think what I'm grappling with is the issue of, if you do the larger tank, if I understand it, you'll have to fill it about a third to sustain it, even if you don't use it, and I would say it's certainly for the next 4 or 5 years, the odds of using it is very unlikely, given the price of natural gas. So with a smaller tank, you'd fill it a third, and you'd save that much oil every 2 years, because it's a much smaller
But
tank.
this discussion tonight is about
Oh, no.
what is on the table. Having said that,
But-
it's an operational thing, and I agree that you need to look
But
at
it's
that.
operational, but it affects the funding by maybe 7,000, but I think as our board, to help figure that out with the Board of Ed, I mean, if we can, I don't quite understand the logic of why. I understand some dual fuel capacity for emergencies, but I think given the situation and how the dual fuel has changed over time and is no longer a cost-effective equation the way it used to be, is it really worth doing these larger tanks if we're going to replace a tank at this point, at least for the next 10 years, if it means every few years we're going to have to burn much more oil that we're not really needing to use because we're using natural gas? And I'm not sure what the right answer is. I'm just curious your opinion.
Mr. Fleur, what's the question?
Well, the cost would be probably a couple thousand gallons a year extra per year, which is, $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 more. And the question is, why do that with a larger tank and have to do that every 2 years, which over 10 years might be $50,000 more?
Okay.
So it's not a bonding question, it's an operational question, but I think it needs to be asked. Not of the TFC necessarily, but of
But so the answer is really then, you need to have that meeting. I mean, if you want to do that, it can be done, and we can save the 7,000 to put the smaller tank in on this project as we go forward, but there's still, that would mean it's 118, not 125, and if the
But we're looking at life cycle costs, so if we're voting on a project thinking the cost might be 50% more to operate than we think it should be, we may not want to
Agreed.
vote for the
Agreed.
cost.
Yep, we
And
totally
that's
agree with
the-
you. Yep.
So I don't know, Tom, if you have any strong feelings?
The only thing I would say, the smaller tank going in, keep in mind you have to buy clean fill to fill the rest of the hole. That was taken up by the 10,000-gallon tanks, so it's not a true savings of the 7,000 difference. The other thing is just, all these tanks are going to be coming up, all the school tanks and all the town tanks. There's a lot of them in the ground, so a decision and maybe a committee looking at what we really want to do moving forward is a good idea. They're all aging. They're all coming up.
Hopefully, it's a process you guys internally can come up
So-
with a methodology as to what makes sense, and, look at the odds of how much gas would have to increase to offset the fuel oil, to see if that's theoretically going to happen in the next, we could consult some gas experts, I suppose.
Yep.
Mr. Walsh?
How long would it take to get a 3,000-gallon tank on site?
About the same amount of time to get a 10,000-gallon tank.
Would it have to be in-ground, or can the 3,000-gallon tank be above ground?
No, well, sure, it could be above ground, but it would be a hideous site. They probably don't even have room for it over there. It'd have to be a double-wall containment tank that would sit on the ground. And you're only, then you get into other EPA issues as well, I mean, with that, but double-wall
If
containment.
we
that's a
wanted to
big
try
issue.
to save the $47,000
Yeah,
and
we
not put a tank there at all,
Well, understand, that's part of this discussion operationally.
yeah, if we wanted to try to save $47,000, which I guess it'd be a little bit less because we'd have to fill the space, right? So there'd be a little bit of money for
There would be
fill.
money, you'd have to take out the old fill that was contaminated, put in the new fill. Now you have a fairly large hole for a 10,000-gallon tank that you've got to put in, and the 3,000-gallon diameter-wise is much smaller. So you still have to fill that area, and that's to Tom's point.
But I guess the question I have is, to Mr. Cullen's point, if there was an emergency, say we were out of natural gas, stopped running at that school for some reason, they cut a line or whatever, what would be our fix for that on a short-term basis? If we say we don't do the oil tank at all, we fill it, we don't buy the tank now.
Well, the discussion at the TFC the other night was that question exactly. It's similar to Mr. White's solution. Put the tank inside the building. You could put a small tank but you're only going to get a few days out of that tank. So if it becomes a really big issue, you're going to have the truck pulling up twice a week to do it.
But doesn't that seem like a little bit of a better idea? Like, we could deal with that because hopefully our gas being cut off at this location for more than a couple of days is going to be an extreme rare event.
Agreed.
Agreed?
Yep.
Agreed.
Although it just happened at Roger Lolo Middle School,
All right, but we could,
brand-new school, so it happens. I mean, you want to take that chance with a building with that many students and staff in it, and like I was saying, long-term, if this is the direction we want to go, then each oil tank that comes up, we're going to eliminate the large oil tank, put a day tank, and then we're going to get to a point where there's 16 schools with 16 day tanks, and how many tanks are at the town level, and then Buckley Santa's going to be driving all over town filling these day tanks on a regular basis in a cold heating season.
How long did it take to bring that Ludlow
All
thing
day
up?
it took them.
So it was out for a day?
Yep.
So we might have needed the tank for a day or two.
So in 7 years, once for a day, there was an issue.
Well, that was one, and we had an issue at Osborne Hill.
I'm talking about Ludlow.
You know,
My point
yeah.
is, it's worth looking at.
Guys,
because-
yeah, I think it's worth looking at, but I think it's beyond the scope of this. I think it's, to the earlier comment about a direction on this and a decision from an operating basis seems to make sense, because I don't think you want to do it on a one-off.
Mr. Flynn, may I? Not that I want to add any more to our plate, but why don't we look at this at the next TFC meeting? We'll try to put as many documentation together for it so that at least tonight you can start moving forward with this resolution, the monies, and then if we don't expend it all, and it's removal, and we change and I get the recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, after the next meeting, we get as much documentation as you can, we can help with the operational decision.
It's fine. By me, that's up to the Board of Selectmen and
Yes,
the
it is.
First
Get the
Select.
thoughts, so it's definitely worth looking at.
Leave it up there.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Item number 6, the Jennings Elementary School Boys and Girls and ADA bathrooms, $250,000 was the request, and the TFC agreed with that request.
We agreed because he came, enough documentation was provided to us to show and substantiate those numbers. A little higher, some of them a little lower, but this is the number Tom asked for, and we said, yeah, and he's sure he can do it for that. So
Okay.
it's all in the ballpark of all the bathrooms that they've done in the last few years.
Great. We have item number I'm sorry, any questions, comments on that bathroom project? Sorry, guys, I'm just moving along if we have agreement, because we've discussed these items. Mill Hill School ceilings and lighting,
Here we go.
$250,000, and the recommendation of the TFC is that this work be postponed, and the Board of Education do a pad replacement program on an as-needed basis, and stay in effect until the major HVAC project is done in 3+ years, according to the capital plan. Do you want to comment further?
Just that the documentation provided to the TFC showed that they were going to be doing a renovation to the, I asked specifically, are you going to do mechanical renovations to that building? And in the capital plan, it showed 3 to 4 years. Mr. Cullen has something to say about that.
Well, the capital plan shows it in 3 to 4 years, but Riverfield isn't getting approved, which is before Mill Hill. Dwight's on the docket, and Holland Hill is, so I think it's more like 8 or 9 years out. I think the ceiling's in bad enough shape that the students and the parents and teachers of that building shouldn't have to live with a ceiling that bad for any amount of more years moving forward.
However, having said that, let me just get Mr. Cullen did provide, I think I did send this as part of it in a PDF, a cost per square foot for the project and lights and replacement. But the numbers, it didn't give us a total square footage of ceiling replacement. These numbers from Central Acoustics are for ceiling replacement. The only number we had to go on was the square footage of the building, which is 43,000 square feet, times the $2. I picked the middle of the road. Came up with about 110. I don't have a calculator in front of me. And then,
Lighting's another 15.
and then the lighting is approximately
15.
14, or let's say 14. Let's
14,
yeah,
8 or
four. It's right here in the other sheet, and I did forward that to you. So he would need, I would say, $140,000 to do the pad replacement project, if in fact that was the decision you decided to make. That was after information that we received after the fact.
that would be the pad replacement project versus a total ceiling replacement? Is
Right,
that-
Tom did say that they can leave the grid, they go in, they take out all the pads, they cut in the new ones, put the new pads down, something that matches, aesthetically pleasing to the eye, seals up the holes that they have that are there now, and replaces some of the light fixtures that are broken and out of repair, disrepair.
And that would last?
15 years.
Pads that you're only going to get,
So why didn't we look at that first, seriously? If we thought that even this was going to be 8 to 9 years out, and this replacement plan for 140,000 would last for 15 years, and we knew that it only had to last 8, why were we going for 250?
Replace the whole ceiling, because the ceiling system comes as a package. You don't just look through a book and pick any grid you want and then pick any pad you want. If you're buying it from Armstrong, they want the fire rating and the suppression in the system to be equal. So they will warranty and stand behind their product 10 years if you use their grid and their pad. So it was a total system. And we don't know that Mill Hill will get renovated and the addition done in what I think is 8 years.
Mr. Flato?
Quick question, so theoretically, the new pad and ceiling system versus the lighting, what's the that's when I left the meeting, but what's the breakdown of those two? How much of the 250 is for?
The lighting is only the surface-mounted fixtures. As you get into the entrance of the school lobby, there's a handful of surface-mounted fixtures. They're all cracked. We can't
Okay, so
replace
it's
the
not
lenses
full, 'cause the
anymore.
lighting was upgraded
Administrative area and all that.
in the
Correct.
early 90s.
It's only the surface-mounted fixtures.
brief history, Mill Hill was brought back online in 1996.
Yep.
And so we looked at that and said, well, a lot of this isn't that old. And I asked Tom, I said, the recessed lights, do you really need to replace the recessed troughers, or is it the surface mount stuff that really needs to get replaced? And that's where we were able to help him begin to think out of the box a little bit. Said, well, yeah, we could just do that and leave the lighting as is, because in 8 years, you go in there to do the HVAC system, you're going to be ripping all that stuff up, and you're going to be
Right.
replacing it.
Right, so, which gets to a next question, forgive me, everybody, which was this, if it goes by the capital plan, now the capital plan, I guess, is 3 to 4 years, your
Well,
best
that's
estimate
why
is
we
8
recommended it
years?
this way, because the documents that were provided to us, I tried not to take too much verbal stuff. If the document says 3 to 4, that's why we said you shouldn't do it. Don't bother, just go in there, put the pads in as required. But if Tom is saying, look, we really think it's going to be out there 8 years, I think that's your decision on how you want to proceed, but the number should be around 140,000 to do a pad replacement to this project, and the light fixtures and scoped out for that.
And that'll last for 8 years to 10 years?
Oh, yeah, what's it,
You said
1996 is 1996 is 13 years ago?
If it's
Yeah,
a
so
here we are.
warranted system, I mean, the system that was purchased in 1996 was a 1-year warranty, was a very, very, very inexpensive pad and grid system.
That lasted 15 years.
13.
13 years. Yeah, Mr. Brockville. my
Is
apologies.
that inexpensive, bare bones pad system the one that you would be recommending now?
No, it's a middle-of-the-road pad.
The
from
number he had, yeah,
proposal
some of
we
the,
got.
I think I sent that stuff to you, it's a middle, I
didn't
picked
get
the
to
middle
see
of the road number.
We have some as
Picked the
low as
middle of the road.
$219 a square foot and some as high as $279 a square feet,
Pennies.
square foot.
Well, pennies times a lot.
Well, agreed, I don't mean to just downplay that.
Right. I mean, at the very least, I would think, well, I don't want to get, okay.
Mr. Bolito, and then we'll go to Mr. Tetra.
Just so we make sure we're in the same ballpark here, looking up here.
Yep.
Is that middle of the road? Is that premium?
That's middle of the road.
It's middle of the road.
What would a low part of the road be? Just
Well,
plain white?
Styrofoam.
You should come to Mill Hill and look at the rooms.
I missed that one, unfortunately.
They're all cupping, so the four corners are sticking up and they're sagging.
But the grid system's still intact, correct? That was your statement?
That was our point.
All right.
That's our point. And we looked at that, and the building has a full fire suppression system in it for
Right.
property protection. So we were more like, the grid's fine. If you don't got to change the grid, just put new pads in, it's going to look fine.
So really, the only detriment of replacing just the pads and leaving the grid system is the fact that it affects the warranty that Armstrong would give you. But if we're talking about this as a get us to the renovation type measure, the warranty is really not as much a factor, because you expect that new pads are going to at least get you there, right?
The bottom line, a warranty is good. Like, they're going to warranty for about a year, but eventually, he's going to have trouble matching the pads that are there now.
Right,
You go and
understood.
replace them, he's still going to have trouble getting pads that match down the line. Now, in that, they'll probably get a budget of 4 or 5 packages of pads for replacement throughout the facility that'll stay there for stock, for attic stock, but then ultimately, they discolor, they don't look the same. It's like anything. And thank God people don't smoke anymore.
Yeah, true. All right, thank you.
Mr. Brockfeld?
But at the end of the day,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Kelly, you're recommending, because it's on paper,
Mr. Tetra, I'm sorry.
that we don't do anything on this project.
We're saying.
I just want, I'm not trying to put you.
Based on the capital plan, but with
Right.
Mr. Cullen's comment to me verbally and to this body, we're saying,
I understand, but we've asked you to come before us, and you've done
And we're
a
saying-
diligent job on all these projects.
Right.
And your recommendation on this one, you've supported them on many, but on this
Right.
one, you would hold off.
if it's 3 to 4 years out. If it's 8 years out, we're recommending a pad
Pads
replacement.
As needed.
Well, no, if it goes 8 years, I think that the community deserves to have that done, but that's my opinion. But that's what we came up with. It changes the dynamics. Add that 4 years on, maybe 5, and that's why we were recommending, that's why he got the other numbers to me, and I wanted to state that for the record.
Okay.
That you can reduce it down to 140, and that would be the answer, but that's up to you.
Mr. Tetro, my apologies, I missed you before.
No, that's okay. I think that you kind of answered the question. This, what we got before us now says don't do anything.
Correct,
The original proposal was 250,000.
correct.
Um,
But in
You're
wake of
you're
new
suggesting
information-
140. Mr. Chair, how's the process work from here? Since the 140 isn't part of the resolution, does that go to the Board of Selectmen? Does that get modified there? When does that, how do we know what we're going to vote on?
Mr. Flato, how are you going to handle
we-
this?
We have a voting session scheduled for Wednesday afternoon, the way we'd normally do each year, and we'd review and make recommendations to the Board of Finance to either reduce the amount, increase the amount, or defer the amount, and go from there. I mean,
Okay,
it
so
would-
we won't know until Wednesday night.
Correct.
Will you be able to get us something in writing for Wednesday night?
We're going to try. Tom and I talked a lot about that schedule. It was the only way we could make it work with this extra meeting.
It's true.
Just going back to
And
some of the
this was
confusion that we
something-
had last year.
Yeah, well, this is something the selectmen asked the PLC to do. They could have reported directly to us. The chair thought the board should hear the report together, which I think is absolutely a good idea, but it's going to be a short window. The problem is to get it on the RTM call. Wednesday was the latest, basically, to get those votes on for March. And if we mess the whole schedule up, then a lot of the summer work could be affected.
Yeah,
All right.
That's the problem.
Mr. Flato is absolutely correct. We discussed this in an earlier meeting, and this is less than optimal, but achieves the objective of hearing a review and getting it to the RTM on a timely basis.
Yeah, as long as the information is clear for us on Wednesday, so we know what was decided and what we're voting on. And I guess the same type of question on the Holland Hill project is are we talking about doing this whole review, not between now and Wednesday? So on Wednesday, are we talking about not voting on the Holland Hill project, or voting on the project and then potentially pulling it off the table if we decide to go in a different
We have
direction?
to try to make those recommendations to you and say, if we want to do further, then wait a year, or if we want to plunge ahead and go ahead, do this one, but then review it for the next projects.
Mr. Flato, that tank's got to come out this year. You're at the end, you're at the DEP's, 27 years, you're
Right,
there.
but I meant the idea about a full replacement versus
Okay.
just.
Okay.
But hopefully we'll have that discussion at our meeting. Hopefully it wouldn't take all night, we'll see. But, and yes, I'll probably try to create a matrix that'll make it easier for us to summarize the information after the meeting, to get it to you within an hour or two for your meeting.
Sure.
And it's going to be a very tight window.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just trying to get some clarity on what we'll be voting on Thursday, or Wednesday, I guess.
Roger Ludlow Middle
Mr.
School.
Flynn, can I
Oh,
ask-
I'm sorry,
can I
any
ask
other
two
questions,
additional-
comments? Yeah, please.
Since this building reopened in 1996, the 14 to 15 years we got out of it, is that out of the ordinary? Is that?
For what we're saying was recommended to the
The
pads?
ceiling system.
The ceilings, the grid's okay, it's the pads that are buckling from the heat of the roof wearing down on them. That's about
Humidity.
right. You don't get much more than that.
So we're replacing the ceilings, basically all these pads in every one of our schools every 15 years?
No, it depends on what's happening with respect to the heat
Depends if they're
transfer.
ventilated. The schools that have HVAC systems, fresh air and AC,
Right,
are doing much better because there's no humidity. The humidity affects the pads. The moisture soaks them up, and they tend to bow a little bit, and then when it dries up, they harden in that position. So they're,
Like a school like Sherman, where we're putting a ventilation system in, when was the last time a project like this thing was done where we had full pads throughout the entire school?
We did Sherman, I'm not sure of the year. Dave Fryer might know, 3 years ago, we did Sherman's ceiling and lights. Dwight's, we did all their ceiling and lights. They had all surface-mounted fixtures.
So basically, is this going to alter, if we invest the money and we put $120,000, $130,000 in, are you guys basically saying that if you want that investment, that you're going to allow this project to go out 8 years as opposed to having it come back in 4 years? Because if we spend the money of $130,000 on a new ceiling system, I'm going to feel really stupid if you tell us 4 years from now, I want to redo McKinley, I want to do Mill Hill again, because I would have felt like we threw that money in the garbage can. Are you saying that you're not going to, or it is an intent of central administration that if we do this system, that we're going to get our use out of it, and therefore Mill Hill will not be being done for about 8 years? Because I'm
I
trying to
wouldn't.
figure out whether I should spend the money or not.
I'm not telling you I would postpone Mill Hill's renovation and addition 8 years because I just put new pads in this school. I'm not going to say that. That's not something I would do. And that's not something I would recommend to central office or to the Board of Ed.
Would you rather not
No,
do the project?
as we had
and-
discussions with the first selectman many times, we proceed with our long-term projects. That includes ceiling replacement, boilers, windows, everything, whether there's a large addition and renovation proposed further out or not. The ceilings at Mill Hill are in terrible condition. We're replacing them with different pads. They're all bowing. We were concerned they weren't meeting the fire rating through the fire marshal's office because they're actually leaving cracks around the four corners. That's why we proposed this project.
And I respect it. It's just hard for me to spend $130,000 or more if I know that it's still your full intent to go for a full renovation in 4 years. That's the problem I have.
I understand.
Mr. Hiller?
Just a point of clarification, Mill Hill reopened in '91. The
Was it
renovations were completed in '91.
It's early 90s.
Thank you. Any
Time
other
flies.
questions, comments on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll go on to Roger Ludlow Middle School. The roof repairs, $50,000,
Yes.
and you have $45,000.
The documentation provided by Mr. Cullen had numbers that were not 50,000. They were, I think it was $37,000 or 20. It was a complicated document. It was an estimate.
Well, the issue is the manufacturer of the roof and contractor that we met with are willing to eat half the cost and all the material, half the cost of labor and all the material. We only have to come up with half of the labor based on what they found. Now, we haven't had any infrared scans done yet. They haven't done any cores yet.
But you guys agree on the $45,000?
Yes.
Sir.
All right.
Correct.
Can I ask one question on this, too? Go ahead. Do you want to do it real quick?
You might be reading my mind, so.
Okay, there's a big, bold, underlined sentence in the middle of this that goes right to an article I read in the newspaper the other day regarding roof warranties. And this says, as a result of these discussions, the TFC questions the value of extended warranties on any roofing projects, as it appears the warranties are not dependable.
Who did the roof, Tom?
Hartford Roofing,
And where are they today?
they're out of business.
Thank you very much. The warranty's no good. So they
Well,
had to
the
go to the
warran-
manufacturer
I think the
to get
warranty's
that
still
part of the
good.
warranty done.
I would say the warranty's still good. It's Firestone Manufacturing, and we have shown, and I can share with you tonight if you want, Sal Morabito has the numbers that we have saved in the past 4 years by calling in the manufacturer on any roof defects. I've talked about this before. I've told you 1 year we had 40-something thousand, 1 year 60,000.
Yeah, I read,
Those are all calling the manufacturer in on the warranty and getting things paid for that aren't coming out of the Fairfields budget.
Can we see that analysis, I mean, just separately? I just noted, like I said, I read in the paper the other day that there was a $900,000 approved. Is that the right number that I read?
It's close, 958 or 968.
Okay. Approved by the Board of Ed the other day to extend roof warranties
Yep, for 5 schools. and-
for 5 schools. And it just struck me as a large number on the face of it. And I'd just like to know, what the cost benefit of that has been in the past.
Sure.
And, wow, this just brought it right to my attention here, reading it like this. So I'd love to see what the cost-benefit of those warranties have been over the past number of years. I'm sure the others have seen it on the Board of Ed and all that. I just haven't seen it and would love to better understand it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Bolito?
Just on this point, and I think it'll dovetail into number 9 on McKinley, isn't one of the problems with the manufacturer's warranties is that they don't cover work done by the contractor as far as underlayment goes? Because I seem to recall we had an issue with McKinley where we couldn't recover on the warranty because what was messed up was the underlayment underneath the shingle. So technically, it wasn't Firestone's product that was defective. It was the way the contractor, sealed up the seams where those kind of scoop things are. So is that an issue as far as spending that money on the manufacturer's warranties and relating to these two specific projects where, it seems like Ludlow, we were getting something out of it, but McKinley, for example, we're kind of stuck as far as the warranty goes?
Well, the warranties, since you're not in the business, they're very difficult to read and understand. They cover everything from the membrane and the products that are being brought to the site that the manufacturer's supplying to the details specified for pitch pockets around penetrations, to the way the membrane comes up the coping in the parapet
Right.
and is attached. They're pretty much warrantying and backing their product if it's installed properly.
Yeah, so,
But if installed properly is the key point, because the roofing material is only as good as what goes underneath it, and if that's not done properly, then you can have the best warranty in the world, it's not going to cover you, and you're not going to be able to recover your costs, correct?
They'll cover the material, they always will. They won't
underlayment as
cover
well?
The installation, any contractor error, they won't.
So if there's contractor error in terms of whether it's the underlayment or just building it out, that's not going to be covered. That's when we need to go
Some cases.
recover from the contractor, and if they're not in business anymore, then you're out of luck.
Right, correct.
All right, thank you.
any other questions, comments? Mr. Flato?
I thought you read my mind, but I actually had a different question, and now it's piggybacked into two because of your question. So one's quick and one's maybe a little more complicated. The quick one, I guess, as you know, I want to try to support a package similar to the last few years in capital maintenance needs. I think what surprised me with this one was just the small amount, because usually we have a threshold of $100,000 on these. Is there a reason the board wouldn't take this 32 or 40 out of their regular $50,000 account in the regular budget for roofing repairs?
Yes, well, first of all, we did get the message that you wanted them to be of a certain threshold. When I talked with Dr. Title, we decided to combine the two since they were roof-related. So the two were the McKinley and the Roger Little Middle School. So that's why you're seeing one for 50,000. It seems to stand out. We combined it and said roof problems at two schools.
And then
The
the
reason we wouldn't take it out of our roof preventive maintenance program is that's so low now, covering 16 schools and all the site visits and reporting and repairs they are doing. It would eat away more than half of it.
And then the bigger question, I hesitate to ask, but since it came up, I think we should hear. So the district, the board voted on a large warranty program to the tune of $900,000. Where is that money coming from? All of this year's budget? Where is it over 5 years?
We don't know any of that yet. You're kind of beating me to the punch. We would have a letter going out to the first selectman explaining this project.
Oh, so this would be a capital project?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad, so glad.
Yep, I have a lot to say about that, but I don't think you want to do it tonight.
All right, no, that's all right. I just was hoping maybe you found $900,000 in the budget.
Yeah, we have a lot of backup for that and information to share.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Brown.
Just real quick, what is the square footage of this roof?
The entire roof is somewhere in the 300,000 range.
This portion was
So
smaller than that.
what does significant portion,
200,450 is the whole building, but this is only over the auditorium, which is about 25,000 square feet.
okay, so that's what we're talking about, just 25,000?
We're talking about 18,430 of that 25,000.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Seeing none, we'll go to McKinley Elementary School, coping stone,
Oh, crap.
coating repair and maintenance, 100,000.
Well, it is the recommendation of the TFC that further investigation into permanent repairs, and accountability for the faulty design and/or installation should be undertaken. The condition needs to be repaired as soon as possible. Mr. Cullen presented, and I have a different number also at the bottom of your, and it's McKinley. So, $171,933 would be to remove all the coping stones on top and put in flashing across the entire top between the parapet, the exterior, a curtain wall, and the interior wall space where it meets at the top of the roof, reflash and reapply the coping. That's what that number represents. There was a discussion with Mr. Cullen about that because that's what we believe to be the better solution, as opposed to putting in a coating over the top of it and trying to repair those pieces. The building is, what is it, 2003?
Yep.
2003, 2003, and we already have a fairly monumental issue with it. Again, some of this information came after the fact, so we wrote some of these things, so that's why we said we should be looking into this more. I don't see us not being able to do anything with it this year, but it's way out of what Tom originally asked for in dollars, but it's also something that needs to get done. And whether it's 171, but I believe that's only a quick quote from that we had, that Tom got somebody out there for us at our behest, at our request, for it to happen. But if you see the photographs you'll see, which I don't believe I copied or sent to anyone, but there's a lot of damage, and it could be spot, it could be in different locations, but our concern was it needs to be looked at. And then, here we go. There you go. Having said that?
I just was going to say, the initial estimate and work that our PM roof contractor looked at was a sealant, a weatherproof sealant that could go over the stones. Because essentially, the rainwater is hitting the stone copings on the whole perimeter parapet, soaking through the stone, and then when they hit the wall system, the flashing that was put on the wall was done in pieces. It wasn't continuous. So it's open and there's penetrations and it's floating straight down through. So his initial response was to try and come up with a weatherproofing sealant that you could coat on there. We then asked him, after we met with TFC, to look at replacing it, take the stones off and put the right flashing. And they came up with that proposal, which came in late Friday, early this morning.
Correct.
Which is why I
I'm going
have
to go to
that.
Mr. Bolito, and then I'll get Mr. Flato and Mr. Stowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we have our esteemed town attorney here tonight, I want to ask the question, because I don't think we got a definite answer last time. What is the statute of limitations on a breach of contract action or negligence action, where we could go after the contractor for not doing this properly or faulty design? Do you know? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure myself.
Could I interject a question
Sure.
alongside that before Dick answers? Because I think it's going to affect his answer,
Okay.
and it's frankly befuddling to me. How long have you known about this, and why wasn't the town ever told? I mean, I was the chair, the vice chair of the elementary building committee. How long, I mean, within a year, if this was happening, it must have been 5 years ago, no? Or did it just start this year?
No, it just, the first thing we found was a couple of the windows that are up high, the clerestory windows, that were also leaking. We found the caulking to be bad there, and we replaced that.
This
Then
just
as we
started
did
in the
more
last year or
research-
so?
Yeah, I would say so.
So
Well,
then
they probably recognize the problem.
And we asked for an investigation of that area of the roof.
What time frame?
Last year.
So it just started over the last year?
Yes, correct.
Okay, because obviously that affects the warranty issues.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Well, I don't mind being on the spot. I'd be a lot happier if I could give you a solid answer. I'm not sure that I can. I mean, you get a 6-year statute of limitations on a contract, you get a couple years on a negligence claim. If you have a warranty issue, that's a contract, you get to see it, and again, when does the statute of limitations run? It's going to start when you knew or ought to have known, I believe. And if we're within a year, we're probably in relatively good shape. That's a guess.
Understand, and kind of putting you on the spot and don't have all the facts. If we were to pursue a legal remedy, would that go through your office, or would that go through the Board of Ed's attorney?
Well, the last time out, when we dealt with the former McKinley, that went through me. Yeah,
But
Right.
it normally starts with purchasing and assistant town attorney, and then if it gets to that point, to a claim possibility. But it's a contract issue, and the question is the bid, the contract, what did it say? What's the warranty? This was 2003, the school opened. If the warranty is 5 years, and didn't happen until last year, we're out of luck, if it's that black and white. If the warranty is 10 years, then, there's some real talking to do.
But above and beyond the warranty, if there was faulty design or negligence on the part of the contractor who installed the roof, it seems to me what Attorney Saxel is saying is there's at least a possibility, given that this was recently discovered, that we may have a cause of action, and I would just like to know that we're investigating that avenue.
Yes, I mean, there may be some liability on the architect's part, either in design or supervision.
Right.
And I think it's a very long statute of limitations with architects, but I can't really remember that off the top.
Right, neither can I, that's why I'm asking. Thanks a lot.
We'll go to Mr. Stone, then we'll go to Mr. Walsh. Thank you, Mr. Saxel.
What are we doing wrong that we're having all these problems with all these schools that are new? Starting with Burr, and McKinley's really brand new. You're having the problem with Ledlow.
I don't
with
think
the
it's
design.
things we're doing wrong. I would say it's the things we're doing right. We've set up and designed these PM programs to monitor the HVAC equipment on the roof, because we don't have staff that are up there constantly monitoring it, to walk the roofs on a regular basis and look for problems. We have a software program for the custodians. Anytime there's a leak in a school, they document it in the software, and then the PM roof contractor comes out, investigates them and repairs them, and things are being watched and checked on a regular basis. So we're catching a lot of these things before they get worse and get larger.
Yeah, but are we having maybe this isn't for this discussion, but for this evening, but are we having problems with picking the wrong architect or the wrong engineer? I mean, we're spending a lot of money on architectural fees and engineering fees, and then we come in, a couple of years later, we have these major problems, which cost the taxpayers a lot of money to repair. So, it's just a comment I'm making.
Yeah, I would agree with you on some part. I mean, this McKinley one is a major contractor error that should be looked at. Definitely the flashing's been put in pieces, and it's not continuous on the whole
In
top.
Burr, we've always had problems.
So, but some of the other ones are just standard when you get a new building. Things happen, Burr, we replaced, 9 broken windows so far, and nothing hit them. It's movement of the building, so they're normal for a new building.
Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, Mr. Cullen, I'll tell you, it does concern me that at a school that had to be torn down because of water infiltration, we're now dealing with a brand-new school with a water infiltration problem. And that problem, whatever it is, I think needs to be addressed right away, so we're not tearing down another school. And I guess my question is that this building was built in 2003, and the leak started a year ago. What happened from 2003 to 2010, because I presume that it was raining during those periods of time? Why wasn't the water infiltrating during those 7 years, and now all of a sudden now it started infiltrating? Like, if the stone is porous, the stone is porous. It should have started infiltrating the first year.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the stone was treated before it came to the site, if some of the caulking or mortar between the stones started, eroding away. I don't have the answers as to why we found this a year ago, and the building's been open 8 years.
Anybody have anything else? Mr. Brown?
Who was the contractor on this one?
I thought you might ask me that. Do we know who? No, but who was the roof contractor under Turner?
No, it wouldn't have been a roof contract.
Is it Silktown, if I remember?
It might have been Silktown.
I think.
We'd have to get back to you on that. Might have been, could have been Hartford Roofing.
And it might be someone, whoever it is that we want to contact, assuming they're still in business. It might be Hartford Roofing?
I don't know.
We don't,
mention that.
I don't know. I don't know.
Mention
We're going to
that.
have to get back to you on that. We don't know.
What we do need to do, though, in all seriousness, and I know it's getting late, and I really appreciate our department heads been waiting, but we do need a procedure as soon as something is discovered, that the purchasing authority gets notified, within a reasonable time, so that we don't wait for a budget session to hear about it a year later. And it's something we got to work out.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll go on. Let's go to siding replacement at Roger Ludlow. Recommendation, the request was for $250,000. The recommendation of the TFC is that this project should be removed from the capital program at the present time.
It's cedar siding. That's the premise for that discussion. And it's not to the questions that were asked. Is it leaking? No. Is it warping? No. Is it discoloring? Yes. Okay, let's get as much life out as we can before those start to happen. So we recommended to Tom, said, this is not something you should be doing. Houses, roofs, Mr. White said the roof will last 35 to 40 years. It's a cedar roof. So the cedar sizing, same material. It's going to last a long time. Yes, it's starting to age, but so did Nantucket. I mean, it's all going to turn gray, and that'll have its own mystique to it. And then eventually, the solution that he's proposing tonight. But let's get as much life out as we can. That was the sentiment as the Town Facilities Commission. Use it up.
Questions, comments, anybody? Mr. Cullen, anything to add?
I was just going to quick question, I mean, to the district, have you thought about, do you wish to withdraw this one, or do you want it to go forward, or?
My only concern was in talking with the contractors that looked at it, said eventually it is part of the building envelope, and although the cedar is made for being outdoors, it will start to cup and bend and slowly rot, because it's not an expansive material, it's in a small area on the wing walls and on the building. But, the TFC recommended postponing this,
Appreciate
so.
it by Wednesday. If you guys have any other feedback, let us know.
Yep. Okay.
All right, item number 11, Tomlinson Middle School, front facade and cornice work, $250,000. Recommendation that further investigation, documentation, and additional estimates be procured prior to any decision on this project. However, the condition needs to be repaired as soon as possible to stop the decay.
You like that?
This kind of goes right back to the McKinley one.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, what happened
We'd like
is-
more time, we don't have much more time.
No, and I'm trying to, and I've gotten looking here, okay. Having said that, but we got additional information from Tom later about, he went ahead, had CGM contractors out there. They looked at it, they came up with a number of $127,425, but it was a number from a contractor in a day, he was kind enough to do. There wasn't a whole lot of breakdown to it, but the wood's rotting, the doors need to be replaced, the work needs to be done. The question, I think, for you guys is going to be, do you do it just in this capital improvement, or do we come back this year with more information to give you better numbers and then ask that way? Because it's going to have to happen. The wood, the columns, our concern is the columns are beginning to rot. And it's been this way, and I hate to even say this, but since they looked at it way back when they renovated the school. They put it off as they didn't have enough capital then to do it. They did other parts of the building, and now here we are looking at it, and it needs to be done this year. So I leave in your capable hands. I think we need more information on lead testing, lead abatement, contingency plan, and possibly another look from another contractor to get better numbers. We're going to probably have to have an architect. Do you think you need an architect? Do you think this can be done with just a contractor?
I'm not sure. The doors are pretty easy install, and the wood will stay even if they have to replace pieces of it with another material. So it would just be a specification, I think, for bidding. So we'd need.
So there might be the
some
need
type
for
of
a
engineer
professional.
to
There
do
might
a
be the need for a professional as well.
specification, so it can be bid.
We don't have those numbers, and in good conscience, we can't ask for a number unless we have a better backup on it. But it needs to be done.
Is there any historic consideration that we have to take into consideration? Because maybe there's some other vinyl, a lot of people put in vinyl-coated columns these days. I don't know what things might be appropriate or not appropriate, but if it's historic, we might have to consider that.
Did
But
look
if
at that.
not,
We did look at that, and CGM has some people that have done historic buildings, and they said it's not. However, if they replaced any major sections, they're looking at a synthetic material. There's one called Phi-Pon that they put in that is a maintenance-free product that they can replace any large areas.
Is that what you were considering here, or would?
Looked at. He said in most cases, he's going to replace it with composite material. The areas that he could see right off the bat were the two front columns in the front of the building and the back of the building, the entrance and the little roof that's over it.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Board members on this item?
Yeah, just a quick thing.
Yeah, Mr. Kiley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Much like item number 9, obviously, item number 11 needs to be done, to preserve the building, to, keep us from having mold in McKinley, and to keep the building safe for the students. I certainly agree with that, but in light of the recommendations that we might not have enough information to make a decision on either, I don't think in my case doing it or not doing it, but at what price and when we can do it. Maybe we throw out a recommendation that we carve a couple of these out and give the appropriate bodies enough time to come back to us, maybe at our April meeting, so that if we do decide that we're going to go ahead and fund them at an appropriate level, that we don't slow down the process of getting the projects completed, because I'm going to guess that much of this work would get done during the summer, should it be approved either next week or within a few weeks thereafter. So I don't know what the best way to approach it is, or how much time we have, but I'd like to find some kind of compromise for us to get the information and the accurate figures, rather than just having to make up or down decisions on unknowns.
Mr. Flato, do you have any thoughts you'd like to convey on that?
My gut is something like this, given the risk if something starts rotting too far, that I might be willing to support just going forward with the estimate, even if it's too high. Because again, if we segregate and not allow anything to be transferred out of these projects, but I think, have to think about it, and here, we're hearing this tonight for the first time, so.
If we have enough of them, though, we need more information on, couldn't we just divide those up and do those
3 or 4
separately in a
out.
different?
It's certainly one of the choices.
One of the other items, just to piggyback on Mr. Kiley's, is the whole thought process behind the oil tanks in the schools and the replacement and that, and whether you can get your committee together to look at that, and
Just
get
have
the
to
committee
chat with
together to
Al
look at
by
this.
Wednesday about whether or not a month would do it, or 3 or 4 weeks or not, or,
Yeah.
but, we'll try to give you those choices.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Mr. Tetro, and then I'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Just to build on that, as we talked about earlier, if we had a kind of a separate appropriations resolution for some of this, we can deal with that and make the bonding resolution flexible enough that it can be combined later as part of the financing piece. But if we're basically going to do the construction, ban it out, with just using bans to finance it, and then come back with a longer-term bonding resolution, an approach like that might be helpful.
Mr. Walsh?
Well, my point was similar to what you gentlemen have been discussing, is that I think we got to fund this and get this work done so it doesn't rot any further. But as long as I know that more estimates are going to be done, or the TFC is going to look at it further, that if the money was in place, yes, we could spend less money, hopefully.
Right.
And so even if we got some funding into place, and if we could save 80 or whatever that worked out to be, or more, $100,000 more, then that would be great, and we just bond less, correct, Paul?
Okay. We just need the appropriate mechanism to do that and allow them the opportunity to get additional information, I think.
Mr. Chairman, one
Please,
last point to
Mr.
that
Kelly.
is, in order to do some of these projects, it may be beneficial to bring on a professional, an architect and/or engineering. So if we may need seed money. So as this discussion continues, you might want to consider some seed money for this, so that we can start right away, right after this is approved, or somewhere about putting RFPs and RFQs out to get the professionals on board, to get the spec done and such, so.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on that item? We're to the last item, page 14 of 14, number 12, the Early Childhood Center at Fairfield Ward High School, $105,000, and the recommendation is that that $105,000 should
That
be
would be
appropriate.
Andrew Ward High School for us
There you go.
old-timers. Having said that, the early child, we did some homework that we picked up on the original Early Child Center was cost the town about $2.5 million in breakout costs for, during the high school renovation. And I just throw that out there as kind of an FYI, because we were asked that and we didn't know, but we were able to get some of that information. Having said that, we agreed with Mr. Cullen. He had the documentation about the work that they want to do for the this is the playground area, right, Tom? Yep. And there's more, it's a little more involved than just the playground. But we agreed with him on the numbers and the documentation he provided.
Great. Questions, comments? Seeing none.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Tetra.
Just, this is really two projects, right? One is replacing the, I'm going to call it the floor area. I know it's outside, but and then actually building a second playground area. Could you
That's correct.
just let us know how these costs break out between those two?
The existing playground, when it was built, we couldn't afford to do the concrete pad and the rubber membrane that goes on it. So we did 18 inches thick of wood chips, and we continually monitor that. But it's been problematic for the program to actually get children that are very handicapped in and out of that playground. So the first number, the 45,000, was for removing the wood chips, probably bringing in some fill to build it up, because the footings for the equipment are there and going to stay, and then be able to pour a thin set slab and then put this rubber membrane down. And then the other money, 60,000, is for a new motor skills playground. It would be similar, that it would have a thin set pad, rubber membrane, but there would be paths for the children to ride trikes and vehicles and learn motor skills, learn colors with stop and go lights and lines and markings. That's the second part of the program.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns? None. All right, Mr. Flato.
No, it's just, I think the chair is probably going to say the same thing, but I really want to, on behalf of all of us, since the selectmen requested this so quickly, thank the TFC and the school district and Public Works for working together. I see Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Sapone back there, and Al had two-thirds of his commission on short notice available to do a heck of a lot of work, and I very much thank the commission for that.
Yeah, I want to echo the first selectman's commentary. I want to thank the TFC for their hard work. Mr. Cullen, I also want to thank you and your team, Mr. Morbido, for their hard work. I know you guys put a lot of hard work and effort into this, and I also, having had the privilege to be able to see a lot of your documentation, know that what you had spoken about before regarding your PM program is absolutely correct. You do monitor those buildings quite well and over a long period of time, so thank you for that as well.
Thank you for noticing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Mr. Flynn?
yes.
I'd just like to make one comment. I think this was a very valuable process, and I would hope that next year we'd continue this and maybe get the information to the TFC earlier. Selectman Stenick was the one who brought it up, and it turned out to be a great exercise. I think we all learned a lot, and I think we might be able to save the town some money. But next year, I think, just as we've been evolving this whole process and moving it up, it might make sense to refer these things to the TFC 6 weeks before we're going to hear it or something, so that we can get that report when it comes up.
How about more than that? How about as they come up?
No, we'll work on that. This was an unusual year, most of the past years, they were pretty plain vanilla. It was, okay, bathrooms, it was, air quality, it was the masonry. This really had a unusual list of projects, and I think it may be that way in the future, but I totally concur with what my colleagues on either side of me are indicating.
Mr. Conley just said that you guys did it in about 10 days this time, so next year maybe we'll give you like 15.
We stopped everything else.
We live to serve. Thank you.
With that, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to be back with the departments. Before I do that, let me ask the people sitting at the table, if I might, what I'd like you to do, if you haven't already, go through, this is a Q&A area. Okay, that's the way we do this. Would you please go through, and I'm going to, before we start, I'm going to call out each department. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions on specific departments. If we don't have any questions on those specific departments, I want to let those department heads go. They've been kind enough to sit here. And then we'll just focus on the ones where we have questions, okay? Thanks for... Let's get going.
It's like it's back in session.
All right. Here's what, as I said just beforehand, we're going to flip through the documents, and if there's a department that you have a question for and you need them to stay, I just want you to let me know that that department should stay. Otherwise, we will dismiss the department heads and thank them for coming out and listening about the budget this evening. He who hesitates is lost, so that if you're not at your seat, and I call the department, you don't know whether you have a question, oh well. So we'll go from there. We're going to, yeah. First Selectman's Office, do we have any questions? All
Mr.
right.
Chairman? I'll make my quadrennial
My brief
statement
30-second
on this.
annual statement.
This is the year in which, as you're aware, the term of the first selectman and the selectman, and this also would hold Wednesday night for the town clerk, in which the terms expire. And if there is to be any adjustment in the salary lines on this, as there was 4 years ago, is required under state statute that it be done during this budget session.
Well, thanks for the heads up there, Paul.
And don't worry, it's just the Board of Finance, and it's just the Board of Finance. Good luck.
Mr. Tetra.
The last time that occurred, didn't we pass that in a separate resolution as opposed to
It's
in
part of the
budget
whole
adjustments?
resolution, but it has to be under state statute. What we did 4 years ago is we did a 2 and 2, but we set the salary. So in other words, the salary for the first 2 years of the term was set at a particular rate. And then in November of 2009, it was increased. Obviously, it would be in November of 2013. Those salaries were increased.
My point, Mr. Chair, is that was a separate resolution, so my question is, who wrote that resolution up last time, and would they be kind enough to do it again?
I'd have to check the minutes on that.
Can you do that?
And we
can-
shall.
And can we plan to do this,
That wouldn't probably happen until the final vote, not probably, but it'll happen on
Right.
the 31st of this month when those
so we
salaries
can
would be.
discuss it and vote on it that evening? And as I recall, it's a public discussion because we're not talking about people, we're talking about offices.
Talking about the position and the salary attendant to that position.
Okay, so Mr. Hill, I'll let you and I talk over the next day or so and inform the board how we'll handle it going forward, but we'll handle it towards the end of the budget process, okay? Any other surprises you'd like to drop on me right now?
Not yet.
Yeah, let's, go ahead, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, just since it's been 4 years, can you just remind us at that time what we did 4 years ago for each 2-year segment?
Well, I'll get
Just-
the resolution and what
okay.
the increases were from the previous rate and the steps that were, basically, it was a two-step process, and that is the statutory requirement.
Page 40, Administrative Services.
Mr. Chairman, on that, Ms. Holland, who is not here tonight, will be here to discuss anything on that. Mr. Polito and I discussed this, and she will be here at the Wednesday night meeting for purchasing. So if there are any questions relating to administrative service, I'd ask that they be held till Wednesday evening.
Okay, on page 44, Registrar of
Are there any
Voters.
questions, just so we know
Yes,
whether to
please.
tell Twig to come?
Yes, I have questions
Okay,
on
thank you.
Administrative Service. I'm sorry.
That's all right, thanks.
Yeah. Mr. Tetra,
Are we on registrar?
we are on Registrar.
Right.
Page 44.
Yes. If somebody from the registrar's office could address to us how we're going to handle the ballot budgeting to make sure that we don't have a Bridgeport scenario take place?
Are our two registrars here?
So, yeah, they are.
Yeah, you
come
might as
on
well
up,
come
guys.
If we can do this real quick.
Come on up.
Oh, thanks.
Did you want, actually, Chair, Mr. Chair, did you want to see which ones are questions, then hold them, or did you want to do one at a time?
Let's see if we can't get this one done, and then we'll see if there's others, because I think this is the largest budget increase we have, I think, that I saw, in terms of a percentage basis, right? So, page 44. Mr. Tetra? Do your question?
Do I need to repeat it?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, what we've budgeted for, and actually, speaking as to the increase, We've budgeted for 100% of ballots. In the sort of legislative environment, when we were putting our budget together, there's a lot of discussion that that was likely to be the outcome this year from the state capitol. It looks like now the standard is going to be something less than that. So we'll have, there's maybe a little bit of fudge factor in there. The other thing that we have budgeted for that we normally do on a contingency basis is we think it's highly likely that there's going to be a Republican primary for president in 2012, which is in this fiscal window. So that's budgeted in here. Normally, we come back, and that's not a portion of our initial request. So that's part of the rationale for that.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Brown?
Just on page 42, I take it that just part of this, at the bottom, couple paragraphs, is not updated?
We had
That's what I-
trouble with the Munis system for some reason. They took what we had written and flopped it with what we had written to you last year and sort of mixed it all together. There's another correction that needs to be made while I'm at it. The part-time payroll, which is the two of us, they decreased it by 3,000 for some reason.
It's not true.
They're supposed to take care of that. You guys are supposed to vote on it, and the selectmen are supposed to vote on it to give it back.
The Board of Selectmen will make the adjustment.
We have the original, it's a collaborative process because we don't have the final numbers when we assemble the narrative. So we could send you the original one if you're interested in it that we put together.
Great.
So, then I'll go to myself because I didn't see other questions.
I
Did you
think
have
Mike had one, too.
seasonal payroll, going up 23%, $13,565.
That's including the primary personnel, presidential primary personnel, which we are budgeting for two distinct, separate primaries, because that's what happened last time. They told us you can't share people type of thing, and that's why it's more expensive.
So that's not included in this past year's budget? I know we had originally budgeted in contingency, but I thought we had moved it.
Yeah, we came back to ask for money for the primary and referendum in the fall.
So has this been updated, has the prior year's numbers been updated for that? Because this is a 23% increase over prior years.
So the adjusted budget, Linda, in Munis would be higher this year? Probably?
Yeah, I know we did put a bunch of items in.
We
So
put
it's
money
in-
into the contingency in the current year for the two primaries. We had both the Democratic and Republican primaries.
Right, but where is that? Is that now in the? It is now in seasonal. So in seasonal, right, because, look, in 2010, you went to 40. In 2011, you were at 59. In 2012, you're going up to 72. That doesn't,
That anticipates the Republican presidential primary.
okay, but we had primaries in 2011.
And a referendum, Mr. Chair.
And a referendum.
I think that this doesn't include the additional money that we had as contingency, because we're actually budgeting for sort of 2.5 election events in this, and we had 4 in the last year. So I think that these numbers, the
That's not
past
what
year
Mrs.
budgets
Gardner
don't
just
include
said, though.
contingency.
Well, I would just, in
Yeah.
the adjusted, in the Munis sheets and the adjusted, if, I know Chris probably has it, but it was up by 33,000, and they ended up spending 78 for the year,
So they spent 78 last year,
or this current year.
this current year.
Right.
Okay, so this 2011 is not adjusted for it.
This
There was
would
a
be-
$34,000 transfer into this budget line.
Yep.
Right, but the budget book, Linda, has the
The budget
adopted.
would have been revised to
But I
$93,000.
think we always have to put the adopted budget, the way it was adopted in this book, in the budget book. The new budget book has the original adopted budget before the transfers.
Okay.
Of which we're already spent $78,000.
Right. Okay, so this is, basically, can we get a listing of where we're going to come out this year as compared to what this, I don't have an accurate depiction in front of me of what
Right.
last year was versus this year. Or not last year, this current year versus next year. Okay? And I'll hold off on any other questions. Anybody else? Mr. Tetra?
Yes, Mr. Wagner, you mentioned 2.5 election events this year. I know we've got one in the fall. When is the Republican presidential primary?
There's legislation sort of addressing that at this point. We anticipate it being in February.
Okay. And then what's the other half event you were talking about then?
We had originally, we sort of said, let's act as if we're going to have an election year like this last year, that we would have 2 primaries, whether they be municipal or presidential, as well as for a referendum. In the process with the first selectman and the budget director, we scaled those back. We said, okay, well, we're unlikely to have, the second primary or a referendum, but the sort of the office staff costs that are in our budgets were sort of remained at that higher level because we may, and then that's not really, that doesn't show up in the seasonal pay.
Okay. So then I guess the comment be for the Board of Selectmen, for the first selectman, that how much of that do you want to keep in this budget versus put in contingency in case we need it? And whatever you recommend is fine. I don't mean that, just,
Okay, thanks.
That's all.
I mean, my gut is probably, it's a small area to really have to worry about contingency for this every year, as long as people get used to the methodology. It may not be worth it, but whatever the board feels is fine.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns here? Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, page 46 and 47, Zoning Board of Appeals. Any questions, comments? Anyone? Seeing none, thank you. Town Planning and Zoning, 48 and 49. Questions, comments on this? Budget is, the increase is all health insurance? Seeing none, we'll go to probate court.
And I'd like to thank Mr. Devanshek for hanging out and
Thank you very much, appreciate it, sir. We're sorry for your time. All right, probate court, page 52 are the numbers, page 51 is the description. $500 difference. Questions, comments on probate court? Seeing none. Thank you.
ditto for Ms. Maxim, who's representing probate tonight.
Thank you very much. Page 54, Historic District Commission, a 0% increase here on a $10,000 or $11,000 budget. Any questions, comments? Seeing none. Thank you. Conservation Commission. All right, page 56 and 57, we have a question from Mr. Brockfeld.
Do we have a?
Mr. Stink, please.
Oh, okay.
I think we're motoring right along, so we might as well try to answer them and get you out of here if we can. Thank you, sir. Welcome. Mr. Brockfeld.
Thank you, sir. I guess I'll address the question to both you and Mr. Flato. In its own way, this is one of the wildest budgets that we're being presented with. There's fairly big swings in a lot of categories, in a lot of areas where Mr. Flato has decided to cut back your request. So you know what they are, so I'll let you just address them.
Yes, the swings, if you will, indicate one of the biggest problems that we have to contend with, and that's maintenance of items that have been in the marshes in service for over 30 years. These are the tide gates, culverts in Pine Creek, Turney Creek, what have you. And what you're seeing is the service curve is going down over time, and the cost to maintain or replace is increasing. And we have reached a point of criticality, I guess, that working with Public Works and Engineering, that we've been working this year on 3 gates, and this coming year, we've got to do 2 more. And that's reflected in the fees and professional and the maintenance and repair of equipment. The fees and pro, excuse me, the fees and pro gets into reduction there is on the concern we have for mosquito control in the marshes from Turney, Ash, and Pine Creeks. And we anticipate when the state excavates the accumulated sediment, which is causing obstruction in the channel, which keeps the fish out that would be eating the mosquitoes, when you remove that sediment, and if it is contaminated, you have to pay for the disposal of it. And the engineering department encountered that problem 3 years ago, and it could be significant. It was for them because they were cleaning out the ditches at the end of the pipes from the streets where the most contaminants were located. We're doing border ditches pretty much around the perimeter of the marshes, and they haven't been tested yet, but they may be far less polluted than the engineering department experienced. So that may not. It's hopeful that may not be a problem. If they encounter more than we can accommodate, then we'll have to postpone the remainder of the project for another time.
Okay, and then the other question would be, and then I guess I'd ask Ken if he wants to respond. The top line, the regular payroll, I'm assuming that, I'm just guesstimating here, that you're asking for one extra person, maybe, and the first selectman is saying we shouldn't do that?
Correct.
Okay, and then obviously the health insurance would go along with that for the ride. Okay. So I guess I would just be curious for.
Yeah, it's a tough question. You know, the department was reduced in size a little bit during the last couple of years of budget stress. It is definitely, you know, a department that's working hard. I think the issue partly is that the level of activity versus 3 or 4 or 5 years ago is still, you know, somewhat less. I think the bigger issue is, you know, how much productivity, bang for the buck you get. They've been working, I think, fairly effectively through their work. I know the commission, you know, does have some concerns. There are some commission members here, and appreciate it, Mr. Rice and Ms. Jones, and somebody else, I think. But I think it's hard in this environment to add staff, as you know. So that's really the main sentiment that I in the budget office had. It was very hard to consider adding staff anywhere. I did feel strongly that we should support their needs for maintenance and repairs, and so there was a large requested increase in that area, and I did want to support that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Kiley, and then Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Stanky, for being here. Quick question. Could you just remind me, what are the special department supplies? What is the largest item that's in that line item?
Special, boy.
It's 13. It's roughly $13,000 from last year and again for this year. I just can't remember what's in there.
That would be boardwalks, timber for repairing the open space areas, signs, bulkheads, whatever, fencing, things of that nature. And they go throughout the 58 areas, approximately 1,200 acres of property that we maintain.
Is that an expense that's seasonal, possibly more backloaded for the last quarter of the
That's correct.
year, or not?
At the end of the fiscal year. That's when we get most of our labor out of college.
Because that's the reason I was asking, because year-to-date, you've used about 42% of it, which leaves the other 58%, and I was just wondering what the methodology was for coming back with the similar or the same number for this year, but
Right. The peak is the summer, spring, late spring, early summer. That's when we get started.
So you would expect to spend the lion's share of that for this year between now and June 30?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We'll go to Mr. DeWitt, then we'll come to Mr. Walsh. Mr. Stone, did you? Okay.
Just under maintenance and repair of equipment, last year's budget, as we closed 2009, 2010, right? You were only 67% spent on that. You only spent $11,000 on that. And this year, you actually only spent $700, but I guess maybe a question for Ms. Gardner. There's $22,500 encumbered. What is encumbered? It looks like the whole budget is encumbered rather than spent.
No, that would be I'm sorry, the United States Geological Survey, the stream gauging station. We have a contract with the United States Geological Survey to maintain their stream gauging stations in the Rooster River and the Mill River.
We have they pay us, or we pay them?
No, we have to pay them. That is, they're cooperators, and that's the town's share with the federal government.
And we pay, and that's a seasonal?
That's annual, in this instance, $22,000 approximately.
So we didn't pay it the year before?
Yes.
You didn't even spend $22,000 last year. And not on that line item. We only spent $11,000 on that line item last year. In fact, the whole budget last year was only spent, $26,000 ended up encumbered, and there was still $78,000 left to budget. Now, maybe it was encumbered under fees and professional services, because there's $24,000 encumbered there.
I will check on it and find out.
See, it's
But I can
confusing
assure you
because,
that well, I believe our records would indicate that the geological survey stream gauging stations were maintained.
see, in each year, it seems under fees and professional services, we're transferring something to the tune of $24,000 into that account.
That was a carryover, the primary element in that. I think there was a $20,000 purchase order, which was for the completion of the
wetland
work for
consultants.
the bond.
We've carried funds over for what the Conservation Commission is trying to do is bring its old performance bonds accounts up to date. And they have, I think we did 44 last year on that we carried over with a
Okay.
consultant to do the field and office reviews. That's the fees and pro amount there.
That's the transfer.
Yes,
2 years in a row.
I believe so, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Walsh?
The maintenance, repair, and equipment line where it goes up, what's the major portions of that for the increase?
These are that line item is directed toward the steel culverts that were installed in the 1970s have deteriorated to a point where they have to be lined. That means the steel is so corroded it's beginning to wash out the soil in the dike or road base, whatever it is. So it's got to be lined with a sleeve, a plastic sleeve and then grout is pumped in around the outside of the sleeve and the inside of the old corroded steel pipe. Once that conduit is secure, then you have to, because the plastic will not support a tie gate, it's too soft, too flexible, we have to independently suspend the tie gates on the mouth of the culvert with a cradle, and that's constructed by installing helical piles underneath as a base, and then laying the cradle on that, and then the tie gate on top of that. And that's when they're bolted together and then connected to the plastic line culvert. You have a watertight, continuous system that does not leak. And that's the expense of these old culverts going in.
Okay, and these tide gates, they're considered to be equipment for the town as opposed to part of our buildings and grounds?
Depending on the nature of the work that's being done, it would be, portions of it could be applied to both.
All right, on the following line, where it talks about the maintenance for repair and building and grounds, you requested $15,000, and the first selectman reduced you to $3,000. What's that?
We're looking at the Hoyden's Barn, the Caretaker's Cottage, Lake Mohegan, the structures that we would have maintained. Normally, we have a good deal of vandalism associated with those structures. We haven't actually this year. We're looking at trying to refurbish the barn ourselves, and with that in mind, the commission, First Selectman thought the commission's access to the Richardson Conservation Fund would be appropriate to structurally stabilize that building. It's got 2 out of 6 corners are in need of immediate repair.
Okay, and my last question is, who does the wetlands compliance officer work now within your department?
That would be Mr. Jones. He's the open space manager, combination wetlands compliance officer.
Okay. That's it, thank you.
I was just going to say, the H. Smith Richardson Trust Fund is probably the original donation account. It came up a few weeks ago, donation accounts, but the Conservation Commission and the Board of Selectmen have to vote each time there's an expenditure of funds from that under their trust arrangement. I just thought I'd mention it because we were talking about that whole area last week.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this budget? Seeing none, I know there's some members of our Conservation Commission here. I just want to extend them the courtesy before we dismiss Mr. Stanky, if there's any comments they would like to make. Okay. Seeing none, thank you for your service, by the way. Mr. Stanky, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Shellfish Commission, page 6061. Always a controversial topic. Any questions, comments, concerns on this budget?
Shellfish?
Mr. Flato, this is going up by $5,000 in fees and professional services. Can you just explain what's going on there?
Yeah.
That's the
There's this-
sanitary survey of the shoreline. The Shellfish Commission is trying to find the sources of bacteria that are
It could affect shellfish
impacting
life.
water quality in the shellfish beds.
Are you working with other agencies to do that?
I'm working
other
with
surrounding communities?
Westport and eventually with the State of Connecticut Aquaculture Bureau.
So are we sharing the cost along with them in a proportional way?
Our expense is actually one of the smaller ones. The state's will be much larger, and it's in Westport, it's on a volunteer basis. Happens to be that they're coordinating with the state in the year 2012, and Fairfield will be entering in 2013.
Meaning, they're sharing, so they're ahead of us
They
in
do it
working with the
sequential.
state, and then they'll come and work with us in 2013. So we should see this burden not be as heavy in 2013, is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. DeWitt?
This is a rookie question. Never talk about shellfish. But last year, when we went from 900 to 17,000, I think it was the same general reason.
That's correct.
Now,
Sanitary survey.
this year, you spent $350 of your 16,000, of your 17,000. Are we planning on spending that in the last, what, 3 months, 4 months?
That's correct.
We're going to spend that in 4 months, and then we're going to spend $5,000 more on top of that next year.
In the fall, correct.
And is that because we have to do it in the spring? Is that?
No, normally the work, the field work is normally in the spring, yes, because that's the period of high water, when you would anticipate that you would compromise the integrity of the septic system, for example, which would then float material out to near a water course and down to the sound. And that high water season is for that field
Now,
effort,
right?
exactly the time that you do it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Stanky. We're on to page 62 and 63, legal services. This one's up by $61,000 or 12%. Hello, Mr. Saxel.
Boy, do I have a question. No. Just a quick, to help answer your question coming, most of this is for Dick's beliefs about assessment appeals and what'll probably carry over to next year, but just the short answer.
And labor arbitrations.
Which I'm sure will all be done by June 30th.
Look, that'll be wonderful.
Thanks, Al Gold.
Any questions, comments, concerns on this? Mr. Walsh?
Dick, how do we stand with what you've expended to where we're going to be? Are you going to be over budget?
I don't know.
Do you have any
You have
confidence
to
at
ask
all?
Mr. Hiller. I don't get those
It looked
reports.
pretty good a month ago. but
Compared to his budget, where does he stand, and do we expect to be over budget for the year?
Through 8 months, it's about 56% expended, so it's really tracking pretty on target right now.
He may be within budget this year.
Yeah, I usually get, Paul usually catches me in the hall when I'm in trouble. He hasn't done that recently.
Of course, it's not junior.
I'll
We may
tell
be-
you better when I see the.
We may be
March
under
bills.
budget? Did you say we may be under budget?
But not by a lot, because some bills come in at the end, after the end of the month.
Fractionally,
So
potentially.
it's probably about 60% expended.
Yeah, I mean, Carly Fleischman typically is billing, 60 days beyond, and I think that's paid in this year's budget, even if it's actually submitted in July.
Okay. And who are the assistant town attorneys, other than Eileen?
Carly Fleischman, Charles Fleischman, by Pollock, Blue Weiss, and McCahey, and Noel Newman.
Okay. Are there going to be any hourly increases for any of the attorneys coming up that we should know about?
Oh, it would be nice if there was. There haven't been for years.
But I guess I'm just asking the
A couple of
question.
years ago.
Your idea of a couple and mine are not the same, Mr. Flato. It took me 6 weeks to convince them to raise me $5 an hour, and I had to go and show what everybody else in the state was making. And that was 2007, carrying over to 2008. So the answer to your question is, yeah, there should be, but there won't be,
Okay. You handle all the tax appeals, correct?
unless there's a conflict, yes.
Unless there's a conflict?
Yes.
And this number has that amount in what you're anticipating, the extra amount?
Based on preliminary discussions that I had with actually Mr. Hiller some time ago, and actually with the assessor's office, I believe that we're going to have significantly more. This is a cycle. It's a reval year, and this is usually when we have many more. In a typical reval year, we've had something in excess of 100. I'm anticipating a lot more than that.
And my last question is, this is the first time we've had educational memberships. What is that, and why is it new for this year?
This is Eileen's.
It's Eileen's, I don't know.
There's services that Dick and Eileen have been kind of almost borrowing. Eileen felt that she needed to get some additional materials for some of the stuff they do on a regular basis. It's a pretty small subscription. I forget which one it was for, though. It's an online service.
Well, how much is the amount?
It's only 500, but it hasn't been expended in previous years, so that's why I'm just
It's a new item.
asking.
You know, I think she's been doing legal research recently online.
Yeah. It's definitely a new item that she said, hey, we really could use this much more. And I guess they've been doing it, not sure how, through the library, I think. But it's hard to have to go out every time to go to a...
You've had to expend a fair amount of money regarding the third train station, correct?
I put a lot of time in. I don't know how it's been built.
I mean, is that going to be ramping down over, with the station opening up coming next September?
I believe that a lot of the bill that has been taken out of the railroad budget and not my budget, so I don't think there'd be a ramping down.
All of the legal bills that, during this fiscal year that are for Mr. Saxel or other counsel relating to those actions have been charged to the railroad station account and have not been charged to this operating account.
And what other accounts are legal services billed in, other than the railroad account?
The only other active one that I'm familiar with, other than, would be the zoning application for the softball field on Hoydens Hill, which is being charged there. There obviously are legal services for workers' compensation, which are not charged into this account.
And those are the fees from the gentleman who represents us on the workers' compensation cases? Rick, yeah.
For the firm that they retain, primarily with Pomerantz, Straighten and Stabnick and Marrin Williams, as far as defense on workers' compensation.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Brockfeld?
Just a quick one, Dick, or Paul. I know obviously any of the lawsuits involving the pension fund, we have an outside attorney who's getting paid on a contingency of some
Correct.
sort. But you've done some work on that, I imagine.
I
Maybe you
have.
haven't. Is that billed to the town or to the pension fund?
Mr. Saxel's services are billed to the town and have been taken out of this account, which are nominal. And the other, the expenses related to the, to that litigation have been taken out of the fund, net of proceeds.
Ken, are you set?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Mr. Tetra, then Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Saxel, your comment earlier was that because this is a reval year, you're expecting some increase in work or because of that. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I'm expecting a considerable increase, not some increase, an overwhelming increase.
I would hopefully, with all respect, hopefully it'll be an average increase, an average amount for an
Well,
assessment
let's
year.
put it this way, I have one
Too early to
open-
tell.
Excuse me, I have one open tax appeal. And by the end of June, I'll probably have a minimum of 100 and maybe double that, I don't know.
Okay. I was just trying to reconcile that with what we'd heard earlier from Mr. Hiller, that there hadn't been that many appeals of the reassessments yet.
That's why I say it's too early to tell if it'll be more than
well,
normal.
what I-
That changed
what I
Friday. It changed this past Friday.
And let me be clear, that just because somebody's taken an appeal and wants to be heard by the Board of Assessment Appeals doesn't mean they're going to court. I don't get involved unless they're going to court.
Okay.
I'm talking about in 2005 and 2001, prior reval years, where in each of the reval years, there have been a minimum of 100 cases. I have one open case now on the 05 list.
Do those tend to revolve around, it sounds like those don't tend to revolve around a reassessment, but more when the tax bill comes out, that's when you start to see it, or does it just take that long to work through the system till you see it?
No, it's, well, as you well know, the reval is October 1st, 2010, and with that, everybody gets a notice of how they are and how they were previously, and based on that, a lot of people were filing applications for the Board of Assessment Appeals. At the end of the day, I can't tell you how many of those will go away, and I can't tell you how many will end up being appealed. Now, you should know that if there is a commercial property that's worth more than $500,000, the Board of Assessment Appeals typically doesn't even hear them, and so there's functionally an automatic appeal to the Superior Court, which, then becomes my...
All right, then let me just go back to clarify with Mr. Hiller, if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Did we have, you said something changed last Friday, did a lot more assessment appeals come in, or?
Well, this is towards, and as Mr. Saxel points out, first off, we're in what I'll call step 2 of a 3-step process. We've had the informal hearings. There's now, as a filing period for the Board of Assessment Appeals, there have been lesser at this point, but there's still a 2-week, I believe it's a 2-week window that's open for people to file for a hearing with the Board of Assessment Appeals. We'll hear those cases in April. As Mr. Saxel points out, we would then, any commercial properties with over, it's now, I think, over, there's 3 that we know of right now that have filed as of Friday. I didn't speak to Mr. Brown today, that are commercial properties, which will go directly to court. And there were a number of, there were roughly 30 properties that were filed as a group on Friday, significant properties, residential properties.
All right, thank you. I was just trying to tie what we had been hearing back to what you were saying here, so thank you for stepping me through that.
Any other questions, comments on this budget? Mr. Kiley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a question for Mr. Hiller. Could your department please put together a schedule for what I would call our legal spend for the year, including everything that would have gone through this department, but also including all legal bills that would have gone, whether it was workers' compensation or whether it was pension work or building committee work or train station work, just so that we could get a global view on what the actual legal spend was for the year, regardless of where the actual expense ended up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Saxel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Miscellaneous contingency, page 65, Department 1290. Now,
Thank you, Jay.
Mr. Flato, it says no change to this budget, and on the next page, you're asking for $10,000 more. Is it a misprint? And I hope it's the numbers that are misprinted.
Actually, I'm trying to remember what we did here. Did we? It used to be $50,000, and I'll be honest, I'm trying to remember our discussion as to, did we just want to get it closer to that number? I think the 35 was cut last year by one of the boards, and we thought that that was too much, remember, some of the miscellaneous departments, land acquisition, some of the others, often if there is activity, gets spent out of this account. But was it,
I
I'm
think
trying to
you were
remember.
anticipating with 7 contracts coming on board, the incidental expenses paying for the arbitrators.
I think there's
the
two
arbitrations,
things
right.
potentially here.
Thank you.
Is
the
potentially
worry about
arbitration
arbitration.
costs, and also if, relating back to Mr. Saxel, if we had to do appraisals as far as properties for stuff, they would come out of this account. So historically, this is where that type of expense is expensed.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Are we double counting by having some of that in here and some of that in legal fees?
No, because this would solely be for the arbitrator costs, not our lawyers, but the cost of hiring the
This is expert, it's not legal,
third-party
expert.
arbitrators, are part of the third-party panel.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? All right, seeing none.
I'm sorry, Tom, Jim.
Yeah, go
Question,
ahead.
where do we stand on this budget right to date? From
We've got $23,000 left to spend in this, so we've
Yeah.
spent
12,000 spent,
We had 12,000 left
spent.
spent.
23 left.
Do we think we're going to spend the rest of that, or do you know whether some of that is
I
anticipated
doubt
costs?
that we would spend the rest of it, because I don't, we don't have any major, that I'm aware of, Mr. Saxel, we don't have any major court action that's pending or depositions immediately.
The only things that would really, if we had a appraisal or something like that, and usually we have 2 or 3 a year, this last year or two, we've had unusually few, but in most years, whether it's property negotiation or whether, for leases, or whether it's kind of land acquisition, there's usually a few. So, I think this year's low, and last year was low, but on that, but there may be some new ones.
What about the things Al Kelly brought up you might need seed money for?
We could use this, I've always told Al, up to $5,000 I can consider for special study purposes using this account, and I have let him know that in the past. So it is, we haven't talked about it recently, but I can remind him about that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, just as an aside, my rule of thumb is I usually don't kind of allow expenditures over, or Paul, or we don't usually allow over 5,000 for a particular issue unless there's some real unusual, required legal thing that Dick says is needed.
Okay.
For one pop thing.
Thank you, Mr. Fleta. I'm going to reverse myself now. I had originally wanted to do human resources first, but I wanted to just allow to get through as many department heads as possible. I want to be cognizant of their time, so my apologies on that. I want to skip human resources very quickly. Okay, and I want to go to
Not too quickly.
community and economic development, harbor management, and land acquisition. Okay? So community and economic development is page 73, 72 and 73. It's up by $1,600 or 0.86%, and it's all health insurance. Questions, comments on this budget? Yes, Mr. Brockfeld.
The rental and storage, I'm just curious what rental and storage would be for economic development group.
Long history.
Yeah, that was a question I had when I came to work for the town as well. We have a license agreement for the downtown parking garage structure for the Fairfield Center building, and these past few years, we've participated in paying, we essentially help subsidize the construction of the parking structure. In return, a certain percentage of the spaces were set aside for public parking. I believe the term of that agreement is close to its end at this point.
Can we get a date on the end of that term?
It's either this year or next year.
Yeah, I think it's next year.
Okay.
So
The amount, by the way,
next year,
was,
meaning this would be the last year we'll see this in this budget?
I believe,
Right, I think it's
One more
next
budget?
year.
90,
We did, a few years back, when we were facing some financial issues, we did approach the property owner, and I renegotiated the term somewhat to spread out the payments a little bit. It lessened our upfront cost, it lowered that, but it basically, that gave us some initial relief, but basically spread out the payments a little bit.
Thank you. questions, comments from others on this budget? Mr. Walsh?
Mark, are those spaces on the second floor of that parking garage?
No, on the first.
They're on the first?
Yes. Yep.
They're not specifically labeled, correct?
They're not specifically labeled, no.
Any questions for anyone? All right. Seeing none, we'll go for
Thank you.
community development. Thank you, Mr. Barnhart. Appreciate it. To harbor management.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
You know, I should, Tom, if I could just, for 10 seconds, as Mark, before he,
Yeah.
one quick side note, it's not directly budget-related, but there's a good likely, you know, we've had our CDBG program fairly reliably, fairly close to funding of prior years. It was a slight reduction the last 2 years. I'm worried that over the next year, you know, there are some efforts to cut that spending significantly. We've used it for some amazing programs for low, moderate home ownership and relief for citizens, and we're just hopeful, but there may be some significant dropbacks in the next year, so I just wanted to alert the board. It's not a finance board issue or not budget issue, but I just thought I'd mention that.
Thank you, Mr. Flato. Thank you again. Harbor management, page 75 and 76. Again, the total increase is 1,870, and this one's all in fees and professional services. Yes.
Someone could address why that increase is here?
Yeah.
Yes, Mary Von Conta, the chair of the commission, and I'm happy to help her, but she's very capable of doing that.
Mine too, by
Thank
the
you
way,
for staying
except-
there.
Except for March.
I'm sure it is.
Thank you for coming and waiting as well.
That's all right. I'll try to explain, okay? The Harbor Management Commission is responsible for Southport Harbor, okay? And we are supposed to do a number of things. We have a staff person that works for us on an hourly basis. We don't have to pay him for a pension, we don't have to pay him for health care, and the first time he got a raise in 20 years was about 2 years ago. Okay, and he still works for half the price of what anybody else in that field works for. So that's one person. We pay our harbor master $660 a month. And we also, the secretarial, we have a secretary that works for us and is paid out of the town. Paul takes care of that, and but we are budgeted for that. We are charged for that. In addition to that, we are working now on we have a number of things that we're working on in projects in the harbor. One of them is what we call the Lower Wharf Project, which is at the town boat yard in Southport. Are you familiar with Southport Harbor? Mm-hmm. Okay, Yacht Yard and the Lower Wharf, the area in between. For I can't tell you how many years we have been working on plans to dredge in there, to put in a community sailing dock, to fix the bulkhead on the Lower Wharf, repair the piers that are in front of the Lower Wharf on the harbor, and also, even though it's not exactly in coordination with the Department of Public Works, we are also putting into a plan an extension of the boat ramp and dredging under the docks, which may or may not be allowed to happen. We have spent a lot of money on outside professional help over these years, getting an outsider to file permit applications, help us with permit applications, which is very draconian and archaic, and anyhow. And we are about at the end of that process. And we're going to start moving into other process. Hopefully we'll have some kind of a permit, and we're going to have to start hiring people to design things and start planning how we're going to dredge and how we're going to build these things. So these numbers, in addition to that, the sandbar is accreting into the harbor once again. Okay, you know the famous sandbar? All right, we're running hydrographic surveys on that, which run about $3,000 a pop. And we have enough evidence now to start talking about a plan for doing a back pass of the sand and trying to keep the harbor open. And so far, we haven't asked for any money. Now, to pay for these fees. These are our fees and professional services. We collect permit fees from everybody who's moored in Southport Harbor. They range in price from $100 to $200. Currently, the most we can charge for a permit fee is, by statute, $200. I understand the governor is thinking about raising that, making it a mandatory raise, but he hasn't done it. It hasn't happened yet. In addition to that, we now take charge of the moorings in the town part of the project, and we have hired out to a contractor. The contractor that charged the least and was the most efficient is actually the Pequot Yacht Club, who charges us their base labor rate and their costs on the materials. And we now have taken over the responsibility of maintaining those moorings. And by the same token, by code, we have charged the mooring holders maintenance fees. The maintenance fees will have to go up because the costs are going up, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, but we can do that in a public hearing of our own. We don't need to come to you about that. We're trying very, very hard to make the people who use the harbor sustain the harbor. But these bigger costs for these projects are going to be used by more people. These things are going to be used by more people than just the people who are the boat owners. And what we'll probably be doing is coming to you and asking for money. We have $150,000 that was set aside several years ago for the dredging project. Once that's gone, we'll be coming back with pictures and drawings and on our hands and knees saying, please give us more money to help us finish this project. And the project would be over a 5-year period.
Thank you very much.
That's why we
You
need-
sold me.
Okay,
Thanks.
all right. Now, and also, I'd like to point out that last year, the RTM scourged us of $1,000, so that this was, and I must tell you, there were a lot of RTM people who came up to me afterwards and said, oh, we're so sorry, old lady, we did that to you, but at any rate. So I hope you'll see fit to let us have this year. We don't, believe me, we do not fritter. We do not fritter. Most of us don't get paid very much, as I'm sure is the case in this room, too, so.
Thank you.
Thank you for very much detail.
All right. We'll go on to Land Acquisition Commission, page 77 and 78. Mr. DeWitt, do you have anything you'd like?
I just want to commend the first selectman for bringing it down to a reasonable number.
And just to note, that was because of if they did have a real need, the miscellaneous contingency account is there, as we've used for the last couple of years if needed.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you for
On this
the opportunity.
All right, so let's go back to Human Resources now, if I might. Thank you, Ms. Maherles, for staying. All right, before we get into the crux of it, which is the bottom, let's look at the operating budget itself. If someone could help me with the page.
68, 69.
Thank you, sir. Page 68 and 69. Might I suggest that we save the last three items, with the bottom three items here, for a discussion where we'll refer to some schedules that Mr. Hiller had previously passed out. And I'll hold those up and we can go through those, and you have copies if we don't. And let's focus on the other items here, what I would refer to as the operating items for the department first. And any questions or comments people have on those items before we go into risk management, heart and hypertension, and workers' comp. So, any questions or comments on the other operating lines? All right, then I'll go.
Could I just make one comment, Mr. Chairman? In the sheet that I'm handing out on the
Well,
second...
Paul, let me go through this one first, and then you can go to the sheet, because
All
this
right.
is the workers' comp item, correct?
But it relates to what I'll call the upper lines, because as you can see, on the second page of this, there is, for the excess premium, there's a number of $74,895, which was embedded.
Where's that number?
It is in the it had been $60,000, previous estimate. Mary, you'll have to help me as to which line it's in.
Wait, Paul, are you going onto this page?
Yes,
Okay, we're not doing that yet. We're going through the operating budget first.
I know, but it relates to the operating, Tom.
How?
What I'm saying is, if you look at the second block, which is the recommended block, there's a number there for excess premium, $74,895.
Okay.
Excess premium is in liability, and it was budgeted at 60,000.
It was
Which
in-
is the
in-
number
in
that I got
line, which Ms.
in
Merrily said, was
November.
originally estimated at $60,000.
What line item is that in your operating budget, then?
I think it's 53,410.
55,240.
I'm sorry, you're right, I misread the line.
The liability insurance line.
So that's at the line that's reads 590,000 right now?
Yes,
So it should be $14,000 higher, is what you're saying.
yes,
So instead of -12, it's going to be +2.
yes.
Tell you, minor mathematics.
All right.
Mayor, we didn't put that in 53,410, though? I thought that was the increase in 53.
The excess line has always been in 55,240. It's in my notes, so I know.
Do you guys remember then why the other line, Linda, 53,410?
Where does the,
Why that went up? Because I thought that was what it was for.
Paul, where do I get the 590? I'm trying to tie,
590 is a composite number that is submitted, originally the 60,000 was embedded into that number.
do you have a schedule that ties out to the 590? Do we have a schedule that ties out to the 590?
Getting to,
You want to know what's in the 590?
Yes.
Okay. Law enforcement, 78,000. Umbrella after loss of 1 million with a $10 million limit, 135. General liability with $500,000 deductible is 270,000. Auto liability is 42,000. The excess workers' comp was 60, it's now 74. And crime with a $50,000 deductible is $5,000.
that schedule, Mr. Chairman, in the sheets that Mrs. Gardner passed out last week with the detail on it, is on page 21 of those sheets, the big, thick package. I've got extra copies if people need that.
I don't remember that package whatsoever. Well, I remember too many big, thick
What
packages.
color were those sheets? Was that color-coded? Oh, they were white?
I've got extra copies if any of the board members need them.
I got it if you want it. You need it?
Page 21 of that document.
Oh, so it's just a Munis report. So it's not a schedule that shows, it's just the Munis report. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Anybody else have questions on that item? No. Okay. If not, regular payroll's going up by $8,300. It looks like it's one position. Is that a position that was part year this year? It's the benefits manager?
No, that's she's in her last step, maybe that's it. It's her last step. It's a step in the professional and technical contract.
So the last step is a $7,000 increase?
I think it's 5,380 something. Oh, no, that's right, it is.
Yes.
And what year is that? Like, how do you do that?
It's
She's also getting a longevity, because when she was given the position, it's a combination of a step increase and a longevity, because the person was employed and then was given this job and moved along the steps.
She was in one union, and then she was employed for a period of time, and then she She went into this position, so she's now with the town long enough to get a longevity and a step in the same year.
There's only one you get per year, so something's not right. You don't get a step in longevity the same year, unless the grade change.
She changed grades. She went from a
Okay, that's
Thea
right. I just
position.
trying to remember, that's a different issue than a step increase, so, okay.
Well, that's why she started,
Right, the
she
union
changed
structure changed.
positions. She changed positions.
There was a grievance, there was a reclassification due to job duties that the grievance committee heard, and it ended up being a change, and then there was the longevity because of the anniversary.
Did she change positions, or did the position change?
You created a position for me the first
Right.
year I was here as a benefits manager, and she's now been in that position for 4 years. And she had been with the town for a number of years before that, so she's now eligible for,
Okay, I get it. So she's in the last year of that step
A-
change
a-
for
of her
that
s-
unit.
yes.
But because she had been here for a number of years, she happened to be in a long-term longevity period the same year, so
And that results in
Yeah.
roughly a 10% increase?
in this
it's a
particular
real
instance.
anomaly. I've never seen that in all the years.
You know, it can happen if you, make it easier. If it happens with, say, a police officer takes a test, and he's been an officer for a number of years, and he takes the test and makes sergeant in the same year, he gets his 10-year longevity and his promotion to sergeant, or that starts the steps for sergeant. Something like that can happen. It's just very unusual.
And just as an aside, what it meant was she started at the lowest step 5 years ago, instead of just being transferred up to a higher step up front, because she had been here. So in effect, you know, it was kind of a, she started at the lower salary at that new, at that new title.
What's the, I guess I was the only one who had questions, so I'm going to continue going unless anybody, what, fees and professional services going up by 55%?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You know, you promised me you're going to take me first every night, and you never do, and then you ask me all these hard questions. Fees and professional services in DPW, presently, we have a drug and alcohol program. In negotiations with police and fire, the fire was certainly, you've already seen it because it was an MOA that was public. We have instituted a random drug and alcohol testing policy. If we do the same thing with police, their combined numbers are bigger than DPW, cost about $10,000 to do DPW. So police and fire would, I'm assuming, cost around $25,000 to do the same program. But it's a very good program to have
So
in
this
those
is an
areas.
expansion of an existing drug and alcohol program and testing to other departments as those union contracts come online.
And it's random. It's not, it's a program that we use, KERMA, it's used in other municipalities. We're pretty excited about doing it.
What about claims handling service, $15,650?
That is also a number associated with workers' comp. And I think it's volume.
So are you going to be over budget in that this year?
No.
So we're expecting more claims next year?
No, well, that's the number they assured me when I budgeted. I hope that I'm in that realm.
We had an anomaly this year, though.
Oh,
right?
yes, we did.
But we're not going to go over budget.
I think we could go over budget a little bit, but I think I'll probably able to absorb it within my other insurance lines. I wouldn't go out starting off budgeting improperly, but I think that I could probably absorb it. And the way Munis handles insurance is, as long as my lines, all my insurance lines are okay, it's okay if one particular line goes a little over.
Okay, and then Mr. Hiller, thank you for going down liability insurance for me. I wasn't sure what you were doing there, since you were going to workers' comp, or it looked like you were. Any other questions, comments on operating lines? Mr. Walsh?
To follow up on Mr. Flynn's question, Mary, if this year was an anomaly, going up in that account by 17%, are we not? For claims handling service, if this year was an anomaly, what's to make next year And I'm seeing the,
I-
Ms. Gardner
I
wanted
just-
to answer the question.
I just have a question that might jog your memory. I think we switched something between errors and omissions and claims handling service. This is the fee for the service. This isn't for the claims processed.
It's for the service.
It's for the service, the fee for the service, and I think we moved it from one line to another. We moved something, Mary?
I think so, but I can't remember.
Yeah, and when Mary said it was for workers' comp, that might be the fee that we moved.
That's what we
Yeah,
moved
It'll
in.
be it's the fee, part of the fee. It's not the actual claims paid.
Okay,
Oh, no, it's the fee for handling the claims.
okay.
So errors aren't going down this year?
Pardon?
Errors aren't going to go down this year?
I hope not. I hope they do go down.
Just a placement.
He's giving us a hard time. He's pulling my leg.
My other question, Mary, is on liability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
This line seems to go down about 12%. Is our insurance cost just going down 12% a year, or are we raising our deductibles to have cheaper insurance? Can you please tell me why this is going down 12? Should we expect another 12% next year?
No, we shouldn't. We went into market, and we were pretty successful last year, and there just happen to be more insurance companies in the market in some areas. So, and this happens with me every year. One product line may go up a little bit, and another product line may go down, and it depends on our pool and how well they do. And we used going out to market to get some of our carriers to renegotiate better rates.
Have we changed deductibles in the last 3 years on any of these lines?
No. It was talked about in '08 and '09 with the economy, but we managed to, stay with the same deductibles. And we were very lucky and that we went out to bid, and that proved to put some stress on some of our vendors.
And does your department look every year at whether we should be changing deductibles based on what our history is and things like that?
I don't, but we have professionals who guide us on that. And we've taken a stand of self-insuring to a fairly high deductible, but it's worked out better for us in most of these areas.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say one quick point on, follow-up on Jim's thing. Some of you might remember, but it was either 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there was a big spike in all these policies of about 30% in 1 year. And I was a little wild in the budget because it went up so much. So I'm glad to see it stabilized, because for a while after it was Katrina, I guess, there was just a huge spike all over the place.
It is uneven, but usually some go up and some stay the same and a couple go down. So, and we don't go out to bid on everything. It's a pretty big process to go out to bid on everything in a given year, but we rotate the things that we go out to bid on.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on these line items? If not, can I turn everyone's attention to the last three budget line items in the budget, which are the Risk Management Fund claims, heart and hypertension, and workers' comp. Okay? You will recall Mr. Hiller was kind enough to pass out at an earlier meeting a package. The front page is health insurance. Right? Everybody has this? Okay. I think you probably have copies available for the board and for the public. Mr. Hiller, you passed out some additional documents tonight, which obviously we haven't had the opportunity to read through, which is a memo on workers' comp and also a schedule from Mr. Flato. Okay, or from actually, it's from the internal auditor.
Ms. Nolfi.
Right, presented by Mr. Flato this evening. Let's, we can take these one at a time. First, the health insurance. In the efforts of time, would anyone mind if I start the questioning and then we can go? Go ahead. That'd be okay? Okay.
Just, Tom, do me a big favor.
Yeah.
Just tell us exactly where you are.
Got it.
Okay.
I will. All right, what I want to get a handle on first, our board has spent a fair amount of time in recent years wanting to make sure that the town takes the advice and counsel of our insurance experts. And in the case of medical insurance, we rely on Aon, who gets their information from several of our health insurance providers. And we've always wanted to make sure that, or for the last several years, we wanted to make sure that we take their recommendations so that we budget what they've actually told us their expectation is for us for claims for next year, right? So you also recall that the medical budget is split up amongst all the departments so that the expenditure is embedded along with the salaries for those staff. And the average increase within the budget this year for medical insurance on the town side is about 10.49%, I think is the number. So my question is, looking at the first page here, are we budgeting, does this budget tie to what our health insurance counselors, Aon, is telling us we should budget for 2012, fiscal year 2012?
Yes.
I think the quick answer on that is yes. The last page of that handout, Mr. Flynn, has projections from Aon based on our experience through January 31st.
Okay.
We've asked them, in which there has been an improvement in our,
So which number should we look at here, Paul? Just
So if you look.
basically, I think the key number might be the 9.4.
Well, actually, Paul, it's a lot, I thought Linda was going to circle the numbers, we had
Go ahead.
talked about it. If you take the three active totals, which are the first column,
Which page?
I'm sorry.
Which
The
page?
last
It's
page.
the last page of the handout. So it's the last page that says Aon renewal
It's
year.
not circled on our original. This is the original, and I don't have it circled.
Okay, it says Town of Fairfield renewal year,
Yep,
and you just take the three columns for actives. You
yep,
take the last number on the bottom for each column, which summarizes the health costs, dental costs, and drug costs.
yep.
You take the 8.6, the 1,000,008, and the 900, roughly, and you add those three numbers together. That's the number that you'll see on the front page as the total of all the costs projected for 11/12 of 11,387,000. So on the front page, we just broke it out a little differently, but it's the same number. We just, because Kevin asked for what were the total costs for the stop loss and the administrative. So on the front page, we broke that out for him, but that's built into these columns in that last page.
So it's, that number totals the 11,387.
Correct,
Be nice if that were
Should.
reconciled.
hopefully.
Does somebody have a calculator? Can we
I
just?
do. I'm adding it up now.
Thank you,
No, I believe
Mr.
this.
Walsh. Trust but verify.
I think we even did this twice.
It's just such a round figure.
More tragic, isn't it?
I mean, we may have rounded it off to the 1,000.
11,388,900.
You rounded down.
Okay, well,
Okay. So at the top then, on the 2012 First Selectman approved budget, or recommended budget, rather, it has 11,457,000. And that 11,457,000 and the 11,387, those are apples to apples?
correct. In other words, do you mind, or do you want me, do you want to do it, or?
You're absolutely right.
But just basically all the components of what we build in the budget and what we get from employees are
Right.
in that top half. And so that total would cover all the costs expected for the year based on the A&M projections.
Okay.
And then a little cushion.
Okay, so if we turn, the next page I want to turn everybody's attention to then for health insurance is not the last page, but the page right before it. It's called the Insurance Fund Analysis Projected July 2011 through June 2012, which is the next fiscal year. The column we're looking at is the second column, Town Medical. So if you see the total revenues, which are the contributions, that should come close to tying to the town's to the number. It's 11,464 versus the 11,457, which Caitlin told me there was just a minor reclass between the town and the retiree.
No, we pick up a piece of the CDBG.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah.
It's 1/3 of the 21,703.
You're right.
And I don't actually budget for it because it's CDBG. We charge
Right.
back to CDBG.
Okay, so that's that number. And then if you look at the 11,414, right, that's where the reclass comes into play between the retiree and the actives, and it's fees related. And it's the way the insurance agency breaks out the fees a little differently than the town does. So you put this together, and then 11,414 is supposed to be analogous to the 11,387. So if this is all correct, the bottom of the second column, you can see that our net profit or loss on the health insurance for next year is about $50,000. Or we're funding this projected $50,000 more than the latest estimates available say that we need, right, on a cash basis. But that still leaves us in a deficit position due to the deficit we come into the year with of about $550,000. So we're eating away at that deficit slowly with this current budget. Mr. Flato, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. First of all, if you don't mind, I'm going to digress for 10 seconds.
Yep.
And I just wanted to acknowledge the Chair of the Land Acquisition Commission, who was a night owl who came late, Karen Hinch.
Oh, well, thank you for coming.
I tried to explain that I left some extra funds in miscellaneous contingency as opposed to your budget, which I know the Commission's probably not thrilled at, but, but yeah, hopefully if there's something good to do, but just wanted to do that introduction. And thank Karen for coming.
Thank you for coming.
What I wanted to mention briefly was, as you know, there's a desire and a hope, well, let me rephrase that, a desire and a goal that we're committed to achieving some more cost sharing with employees in our bargaining. And I did on this page a note estimating, that goal, that the amount on there is somewhat reflective of the 2 contracts that were submitted for the RTM, if you kind of extrapolated that out and assumed a similar scenario on the copay increases. The premium amounts could be a little higher, but in particular on the copay increases that we've so far, even with those units that we're, having issues with, that seems to be less of a hot button than some of the other issues. So I just wanted to mention that there's a possibility that we can hopefully achieve some of that over the next year, or most of that.
Thank you, Mr. Flato. The issue there would be that won't go into effect until the contract is settled. So therefore, for that period of the next fiscal year where the contract's not settled, this deal, the current deal, remains in place.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting if, for example, some of them are done, that'll be done. If some of them go further, whether we can build the retro against any retro raise, and that still remains to be seen. I mean, we just don't know yet.
Right. Right. Mr. Walsh, did you have a comment?
I guess that's the question I have. Has that ever been done? If we have to retro pay them for their pay, can we retro hit them for increases in their benefits?
It's, as far as I'm aware, it's not been done on the town side. Whether or not you could go back for a co-premium or co-share of premium and get some of that retro, is certainly something I would put on the table. But as far as the changes in the plan, where those are co-pays to physicians and drugstores, et cetera, no, that's just not
I would
possible.
say, and I hope Mary doesn't mind my interjecting, it hasn't been done because we haven't needed to, because the last 10 years of contracts were all done on time and by the fiscal year of the contract. The last time there was really significant contracts delayed was, 10, 12, 15 years ago when there were no premium increases or copay increases proposed. So there would be a goal that we would match that. It's certainly up in the air.
Okay.
No, I was just trying to say that the co-share payments would be very difficult, the co-pays.
Okay, right, because if you went to the doctor 6 months
Because
ago.
they're gone. They're gone.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Just, the clarification. So are you saying, Ken, that in this line here, the town medical line that we're looking at now, that these numbers here assume?
No, they don't. That's what
They
I'm
don't.
saying. There
There could be an improvement.
Hopefully an
Okay,
additional
thank you.
200,000.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brockville. So if we look at let's go one other line, the Board of Ed Medical, right? We've discussed this ad nauseum in prior nights. You can see there, based on their current budget, and based on the revised projections, their utilization or reserve or net loss in the next fiscal year is due to be 1.6 million, which brings their reserve balance down from about a 4.2 million level to a $2.5 million level. We can all see that, okay? The last line item on here is risk management. And here's where we've got another area of concern. And Mary and Paul, if I go awry here, please straighten me out, right? The $2,225,000 in revenues at the top, that represents the risk management fund, revenues of $675,000, and the workers' comp of $1,550,000. And then there's $95,000, $96,000 of recovery. Brings you down to the 2.3. That's currently what's in the budget, right? The workers' comp expenditures, the claims, this is a new number based on, is this the 32-month average, Mary, or is this the 20?
It's the 32-month average.
Okay, is 1.9.
Which just, by the way, the actuary had always recommended the 50-month or 48-month average in the past and recommended us shortening the amount, which in effect increases our scenario here because of this year's experience.
Right.
But I did want to mention it's a more conservative approach.
Right. And then you have the general liability claims and you have the property claims. Right? Now, the 348 and the 92, let's say that comes out to 440, right? That goes against the 675 that we have budgeted in the risk management fund right now. So it's 675 less the 440, right?
Yes.
Problem is, I think, Mr. Hiller, you believe that 440 is a low number, correct?
I don't say that it's a number that is probably one of the most difficult to estimate. I mean, we have reserves for general liability, and the other component is property claims. Really, what this is doing is just taking some experience that we've had over the last couple of years, which has been favorable. As you can see, it's really taking the same number from the current year and just moving it forward. I don't say it's impossible to predict, but it's very difficult to predict. Property claims, we've been very fortunate with one exception in the past year with a lightning strike at Stratfield School, which required dipping into this account. It can be, the fire chief spoke the other night about a car that was totaled. These are the type of things that could potentially come out of there, or, any other potential natural disaster or physical disaster, not disaster, but accident that could happen in the town, fire or otherwise.
Do you know
And
what
it
our...
depends sometimes, like last year when I was before you, the police department had totaled 3 cars. Some of the cars were involved with other people, and they had good insurance, and we got money back. Some of the cars were involved with people who had very small amounts of insurance, or it was our fault. So it's, even if you statistically plan for accidents, you don't know what the other side of the page is going to be until it happens.
Are these amounts higher or lower than what we've experienced the last 5 years, on average?
We have a sheet here, which, do they have it? You have a sheet that was done when we took the last 5 years' experience in these accounts.
Where's that sheet?
It's just 2 lines. The property damage ranges from a low of 65,000 to a high of 187,000. The liability claims a low of 169,000 to a high of 927,000.
Can we get an average on this?
Yeah, there was only $500,000. There was 1 year with an anomaly with a very large claim that knock
Yeah.
on wood, I don't think Dick knows of any significant ones of that size coming in the next few years, but let's hope.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah,
so if
exactly.
you excluded that, it would be probably about a 300,000 average.
Yeah, there's actually 2 years that are quite large, 2008 and 2007.
I don't have it in front of me, but
Yeah, they're both over the 2007, which I think is the anomaly you're referring to because it's footnoted here, is about $1 million total. And 2008 is about $620,000 total.
So probably the 200 to 600 is probably a range, it would be a more reasonable range for a normal year.
If we could get an average of what it's been. Okay, because when Mr. Nahill and I spoke this morning, he said that, I mean, what you indicated was this could be a difficult number.
Well, as Ms. Merrilies points out, there's two elements to it. The property claims, are we going to have a situation where we're going to lose 3 police cars? We haven't lost,
In 10 days, mind you.
we just lost a fire car. We haven't had other major accidents, but accidents can happen. And other unfortunate incidents of a fire at a building or something like that would,
So how did we come up with the 675 number for the budget?
Well, it was a combination of information from Mr. Saxel and from you and from our experience.
I think the one thing that we
Tom,
have
we
done
were-
in the past,
Can I
particularly
just-
on the liability line, if we knew that there was a potential major settlement pending as far as litigation is concerned, we have upped this number. At this point in time, we don't foresee that. It's, in part, it's a factor of the reserve that is held for litigation claims.
Yeah, no, I get.
Can I help on this?
Yeah,
Are we really
please.
trying to address the fact that the reserve was less than we hope, desire in this part of the fund? But the workman's comp, none of us realized, at least as a group, we didn't realize the extent of these numbers until this last month. So we thought we would have a little extra for, building up the reserve until we realized the extent of the workman's comp outlook.
Right. And so let's go to the workers' comp outlook, because the analysis that, if we turn to, God, I don't even know how to paginate this, page 3, which is the actual July 1st through January 1st, July 1st 10 through January 1st 11, and projected through June 30th. The projection right now on the workers' comp claims. I'm on page, okay.
Counting from the front.
If we start from the front, we go 1, 2, third page. Okay? Yep. Yep. If we go through that, and you look at it, it has our estimated workers' comp claims for this year, a bad year, to be $2.463 million. And our estimate for next year is a little under 1.9. So we're looking at a $600,000 improvement there, and we're looking at a flat year over year on the general liability and property claims. Right? And we were short in this account this year, an anomaly, but by $634,000 if this projection holds. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So, if we go back to our original schedule, we're betting on workers' comp to be 1.9, and we're betting on general liability and town property claims to be no worse than the current year.
That's our bet.
And if that all happens, we break even next year
Yes.
on this account.
And, you know, when I was here 2 weeks ago, I said that I was going to go back to, I had already asked PMA if they would relook at the claims. Now, how they had worked out the numbers originally is a statistical, it's an industry standard to use 5 years of data and then to factor in inflation and medical trend and average it. But it hasn't worked out for the 2 years, so they took more care looking at the particular claims, and they just don't believe they're going to be continuing to go at this rate, but they did put the number up to 1.8, and in fact, they did a scenario on a number of months out, and they don't really vary that much. The further out you go, it gets a little lower because you're averaging over a long period of time. But they just still see it as a statistic, as an anomaly. But with that, they want to do this every 6 months for us until we level off.
Let me ask you a question. This year, last time, what was their projection on what our workers' comp claims would be for this fiscal year?
I don't have that number available. We can get that.
Yeah, I don't,
99% sure we built the budget on that projection,
I think you're right.
but we'll get it.
I can get
Yes.
that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, no, Mr. Fletta,
Just
please.
One brief thought. I think we all have to acknowledge we have a surprise, one of the few areas, thankfully, but a surprise problem here. I think we all I certainly expected that we were going to have a run-out reserve at the end of this year, maybe not 700,000, but I was hoping 500,000, and it's pretty much evaporating because of this crazy workman's comp year. It would seem to me that at a minimum, we have to consider, and I'd have to consider recommending at least 200,000 or 300,000 additional to the workman's comp line to deal with this and at least give us some less certainty. And if we're have the year they're projecting, then at least build that reserve up a little bit. You know, whether we look at it from other areas or how we deal with it, I'm not sure yet. But I think I probably have to make some kind of recommendation to the board when we meet, and then to you
Yeah.
folks.
Well, I would agree with you. I don't know if others want to comment on that at this point, but let's put it into the global perspective if we go back to the 2012, and this is what concerns me, and I know other board members, so I'll raise it. I want to point to a projected fund balance number. The projected fund balance number, based on best available estimates and current, what's in the budget document, it's 630.12. On the cash basis is $2,087,000. Mr. Hiller, do you recall what that number was last year, last June? No. I think the number's over 5 million. Is it on the top of the other page? Yeah. Where it's on the top? Yeah, it's 5.3. Thank you. I forgot it was at the very top of the other page.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. So 5.3. And that was the number where we got the comment from the credit rating agency regarding the reserve being inadequate at 5.3. And then at this level, we're at 2. That's the problem.
Mr. Flynn, it's just very hard for me to give you a different number for the workers' comp.
Oh, please, I'm not asking for a different number. I'm just laying out the fact pattern. I'm not trying to.
Okay. I'm very concerned about it also, but the best answer I can give you is something that's come back from our consultant based on some fact.
May I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to clarify, the reason that dropped is because the Board of Ed has reduced their reserve
No, well,
$3.5 million.
no, and my
It's
comp
not-
has gone up.
Right,
It's the
but it's not,
It's the combination.
It's a
It's a
combination of the
combination.
two.
right, but
No,
the
but I-
biggest piece of that is the
Is-
withdrawal from the
Oh,
Board
I
of
know
Ed.
that.
The 1.6 and then the 1.9 proposed this year. So that's not, I just don't want you taking that personally. It's not
Oh,
Now,
I-
if you can make up the 3 million, that would be really, really good.
I'll start praying tonight, Mr. Tetra.
And if you can get out the crystal ball on the...
Well, no, I think Powerball tickets are still being sold.
Okay, how many should we buy for the board?
Yes, Mr. Brockfeld, and my apologies for dominating that
No.
piece of the conversation. I
No,
just wanted to step through it.
you've done an excellent job of framing it for us, and I appreciate it. I would say, all kidding aside, that, I mean, we're trying to be friendly, but this isn't a laughing matter. And Mr. Tetro kindly brought, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, he brought a copy of the article from the Patch, giving a little advertising for our reporter friend here, from when Moody's gave us our rating, and he has it here. I'm not going to pull it out now, but the language is fairly strong, at least the way it's reported in the paper. We don't have a copy of the report, Paul, so you could possibly get it for us. But
Yeah, I think you guys got it.
yeah.
We do have copies, they might not be
Yeah,
right
and
now.
I would just say, and this may be a better topic, and stop me if it's a better topic for our more global discussion next week, but I know personally that the AAA rating of the town is not only a financial issue, obviously, because it helps us get better bond rates when we go out to sell bonds in the marketplace, but it's an emotional issue as well. And we have real estate people here who know better than I do how important it is when we go out and tell people that we have a AAA rating, and I think it also says something about our level of responsibility in terms of how we manage the town's finances. And then finally, Sherry was good enough to tell me the other day that, with the exception of Stamford, which I think lost one of their AAA ratings last year, every town along the coast leading up to us.
I asked the question, I didn't give the answer.
That's right. You suppose, right. Well, we think that every other town leading up the coast is AAA, including Norwalk and Westport and New Canaan and Darien, thank you. So I'll leave it to smarter people than me to figure out how we're going to deal with this. But I would say personally that I'd feel extremely uncomfortable in making any decisions that could lead us to lose what appears to be a cherished thing in our town, which is our AAA rating. I mean, I assume nobody wants to lose our AAA rating. And the only other thing I would say is that Ken and Paul have, and I have no idea where the truth lies, have talked about how Moody's may or may not be coming back to re-rate or to look at us before we go out for some sort of major bonding in, I think, about 2 years. And I would just say that unless we know that for 100% sure, these rating agencies took a lot of flack, rightfully so, for their behavior in the subprime mortgage debacle. And so I would say that there's a decent chance that they're being more vigilant now than they were then. So just because in the past we thought they wouldn't come back and re-rate us in an interim basis doesn't mean that they won't in the future. So I'm just speaking the obvious, I think, but I just want to let people know that at least from this seat right here, this is a very serious issue that I think requires attention.
Mr. Flato?
A couple of global thoughts, and I'm going to try to limit it because I know we got to finish the stuff here, but everybody's absolutely correct that this area of our financial statements is a bit of a weakness. It is, in the big picture, a small area in relation to our overall balance sheet, our overall stuff, but nevertheless, it's an issue of weakness. There are a couple of ways, I tried to spell it out in a brief email to Tom and Paul. There are a couple of ways to address it, and they're both difficult. One I think is much less difficult, but they both have some issues. On a cash basis, the issue is not so much, well, we had $5 million and it would go down to $2 million. If you look at the other communities, very few of them have more than $1 million or $2 million in their fund at the end of the year. The issue is more when you factor the liability part into it. So in other words, the deficiency they looked at that caused the footnote was the deficiency after the accruals and liability was added to the cash, to bring the cash down to a negative picture. And what drove that accrual through the roof was the workman's comp accrual. So it's not just the workman's comp cost per year. That's the minor part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is that accrual for workman's comp went from, what was it, $3.5 million 2 years ago to like $6-7 million, or whatever the number is now. And it just really skyrocketed. So had that not been the case, we would have been shrunken in our reserves, but we wouldn't have probably had the rating agency pressure. There are two ways. One way is to find a way to figure out a way to shift some money in there to reduce, any increase in the deficiency. Maybe we can't make it better, but at least we don't make it worse, and figure out a way to try to do that. The other way, which personally I'm open to, and I think it's not unreasonable, is this notion, and that's why I passed the other sheet around, the study by Connie, as to whether or not workman's comp belongs or needs to be in this risk reserve, or whether it should just be like any other general fund expense. You have a bad year, you pay for it, you budget for it, and you pay as you go. And the liability, if it were a general fund expense, gets lumped in with all the other town liabilities, like bond issues for 20 years and the rest of it, and it ends up being a very small liability compared to our $200 million of bonds. When I looked, and again, we'll go into detail, but when we did this, I thought it was two-thirds that didn't do it through the insurance fund. I was wrong. It turns out it's about 50-50. About half the towns do it through the general fund, half do it through the self-insurance fund, the workman's comp. Almost everybody does do health insurance, interestingly, through this, through a risk fund. Of the half that do it, and Tom and I chatted briefly about this, and I checked into it, many that do it in the general fund do it because, they expense what their consultant or their insurance company tells them to expense. And in a number of cases, they basically hire an insurance company or bid an insurance company to say, here's what we'll charge you for the year for workman's comp, and they put that amount in the budget, and they pay that premium, and the insurance company, if it goes over, pays the difference. If it goes under, the insurance company keeps the difference. Every person we called today said the next year the premium goes up if the insurance company gets hit. So in reality, they're just budgeting for it on a general fund basis. They have no $7-8 million accrual. The auditors don't worry about it. The rating agencies have never questioned about it. It is not an issue for the. I want to make it clear. Workman's comp is not an issue for the rating agencies. They don't care how we do it. They have no care. They have never commented on anybody else doing it in the general fund. So one way to do this quickly would be to make that shift, which would take the pressure of the liability off this fund balance sheet and put it in the general, statement-wide balance sheet where it's a negligible number. The negative to that from a long-term point of view is that you have some budget risk year to year that could go up and down a little bit. But in my mind, workman's comp usually is not that, it's not like health insurance. It doesn't go up 30-40% a year. This is probably the only time we've seen an increase like this in the last 10 years in 1 year. So those are just some thoughts. And I just wanted to throw out those ideas, and how we get more money into the fund, if we want to leave it there, is something we have to think about.
Mr. Flato, on that point, and thank you for spelling it out the way you did, the towns that you did see that put it into the general fund, and I'm going to turn it over to our audit committee here in a second, they didn't self-insure it though, right? I mean, they went out and they paid a premium.
Most of them did. A couple did, but I think out of the 11, only 2 expense. The rest did use, most of them used KERMA.
Right.
Which
So
we
what-
could do too. We could do that
Right.
this spring
So what they
and have
did-
it bid out for next year.
Right, so what they did is to cap their exposure, they went out and bought insurance, and then they threw it into the general fund because their exposure was capped, and they knew what it was going to be, and it wasn't as volatile to hit their general fund balance. Whereas, for the most part, 80% or so of the ones that had it in the general fund had that insurance. We don't have that insurance on the workers' comp. We're self-insured, and therefore, if we did take a hit in any given year, it would be a direct exposure to the general fund.
Although we do have the excess policy, so we have partial insurance.
Understand.
But this year, it didn't seem to help us very much.
Right. Right.
There was a question about the excess policy, I think Kevin asked me.
Yeah.
And when you're self-insured, you have to get permission to go below the $500,000 mark, and only once in 10 years have we gone above $400,000. So it is a good thing to have in case that happens, and when we've gone over it, it was very bad, and we're paying 20 years later on that claim. But I don't think it would be a good thing. They're still looking for quotes and to see if we can get permission, but as of right now, I don't know. And the other thing is that workers' comp has a component of medical trend. It's not all medical trend. It's legal fees, it's when they get their permanency ratings and things like that. But there is a component of it that is medical trend.
Right. Thank you. But, go ahead.
Just quickly on that, whose permission do you need?
Workers' Compensation Commission.
The Workers' Compensation Commission. They don't, if...
The actual commission, not the
Yes, they
insurance
feel if you're
company,
going to
okay.
self-insure, then you
Okay.
should self-insure, and their limit is $500,000. On occasion, they do give reductions to $400,000. I don't know if there's smaller municipalities. They're looking into it for me right now.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that a little bit to follow up on what Ms. Merrily said, one of the things we found out, and in part also with the discussion with the Audit Committee last week, it is only really the bigger towns and cities, which we are part of, which go back to what are called the Tier 1 towns, which are the 23 largest towns, that frankly, for the most part, have qualified to be self-insured and to be approved as self-insured by the Workers' Compensation Commission. So many of the smaller towns, I look at the list here of 21 towns, I think just eyeballing them quickly, of the 21 towns listed here, 4 have populations that are larger than we are, and 17 have populations that are below us.
So, and to the other point is, if we were to move this into the general fund, we'd be exposing the general fund to those anomalies. And granted, okay, that the overall liability might be different, right, because of the size of it, to your point, Mr. Flato. But this board, over the past number of years, has been concerned about the general fund balance, the utilization of fund balance, and the retiree medical funds. I mean, those have been our 2 areas of growing those funds. So to move this over to the general fund seems to me would then be putting at risk something that we work awfully hard on. Now, we were working awfully hard on this as well, and then, I've used the analogy of the stairs versus the elevator. I've beaten a dead horse with that, but that's kind of the position we find ourselves in right now. And I want to turn it over to Mrs. Leclerc. When you spoke with our auditors and you had this schedule, what was the conversation with the auditors regarding the idea on workers' comp? And I know you're going to say it's not an audit issue and all that, but
I don't know, Paul can probably explain this a little better than me. I think he was saying it was more presentation, that it depends which way. He seemed to be discouraging us from making the change, especially in a year that we had such a swing, because that it would hide it more, that it would raise more questions. Is that?
I think that, and Mr. Brown could chime in too, because he was on the conference call too. One of the things he said, first off, can it be done? Clearly, the answer is yes. I think the analogy that I would draw on this is going back 2 years ago, I think, or really 3 years ago in the budget, in the budget year, when we did a similar thing with heart and hypertension, which was a growing issue. We moved it out of the internal service fund, took the liability that was on heart and hypertension, and it doesn't disappear, obviously, that liability. It goes on to the government-wide statements as far as the liability. So the liability doesn't disappear in the middle of the night. It is still there. It is still a number that the auditors have to rely on from our consultants. If memory serves me right, 2 years ago, fiscal 9, we had to transfer roughly $275,000 from other funds into the heart and hypertension to cover excess costs in that. Last year, I believe that number was some $85,000.
So the auditors
This
said-
year, we're probably okay as far as that is concerned.
So what did the auditors say?
There was, another thing is that he seemed to be saying that the way we have it now set up in the internal service fund, we could manage it better by budgeting for the swings versus if we moved it to the general fund, we're really subject to those swings every year.
Right. Which goes back to the point about self-insurance versus being insured, right?
But I think in reality, we're finding we're subject to the swings either way. And I think,
You've got a year
You know,
differential, though,
you know,
right?
Joe is like, well, you're just doing it because, yes, you have a liability issue, but he doesn't have any other reason than that.
Just one last, he was going to put in writing, he was going to get back to us in writing on the pros and cons and the alternatives, so maybe we could just follow up with him.
Yeah,
Please.
I will call him in the morning. We haven't seen anything in writing from him.
So that, I mean, I wanted to lay that out there because, look, it looks like on the health insurance, we've got it where, presumably where it needs to be, but we don't address we don't address in a significant way, unless we get the concessions, the go-forward deficit, right, that we're bringing forward. This budget does not address the deficit that existed coming in. It lowers it a little bit, but it doesn't lower it meaningfully unless we get the concessions and they're in place and they're either retroactively applied or they're in place for a material period of the year, right? And then it would have the impact of lowering that. Fair statement?
Town medical?
Town medical.
And
That's fair.
and
Right.
if I could close the loop on that?
Yeah.
Even though my brethren aren't here from the Board of Ed, you know, just briefly, I did pass that information about the history of if there were any transfers, but as the board remembers, the boards the last couple of years, I mentioned that I looked at it as health insurance as kind of a combined pot between the two things, and because the school side was a little more and the town side was slightly less, overall, the reserve was in pretty good shape, and obviously that was why I was concerned about the fund dropping. You know, I do want to say for the record, I gave you the backup to show you that I never, even though I could have, and even though, by the way, I could do it today, as of right, and I'm thinking about it, I could take that excess of theirs out of their fund today, regardless of what they're doing in their budget, and transfer that $1.9 million over based on the agreement that we've signed. But I haven't done that, because I don't do that, you know, I like to work cooperatively. But I never transferred money out because I felt, gee, you know, we're doing this cooperatively. When I took the $400,000 that one time, the central office knew full well I wasn't taking it, I was reimbursing us because I had offered to front them money for a year that they had a run-out bill that they had to pay, that they didn't have the money for. So I know there was a board member that made an aspersion that I was taking money out of that fund. That is totally false. It never happened. I reimbursed us part of the money that we gave them the year before when we helped them in a difficult year. So I just wanted to make that comment without getting too worked up about it.
You almost succeeded, too.
Yeah, but I gave you all the backup to show the emails, to show you that there was full understanding of that in the central office between Ms. McQueen and Ms. Clark, Mrs. McLean and Dr. Clark. And I know that they shared it with board members, those memos, but, you know, there are new members and all that. But I just wanted you to have that, and
you
I'll get
passed
back to the
those out
president
tonight?
now. Yeah, just so you had it
Okay.
for the
Tom,
record.
can I just ask one clarifying question?
Yes, you can, Mr.
To
Brockfield,
the
please.
First Selectman, and again, this is complicated stuff, so I appreciate that we're taking the time to walk through it. Even if you did that, and I understand you don't want to do that unilaterally and so forth, but even if you drained the 1.9 and moved it to the town side, that wouldn't do anything to the bigger picture problem.
Right, it would just make our side
Yeah, okay, I just
look
wanna make-
better, but in reality,
That's
the
right.
auditors
Right, I mean,
look
I
at it as
think-
one fund.
Right, I think one of the comments Mr. Tetro made, I'm sorry, Mike, previously, is that we are one town. I mean, I think.
And that's the way I always treat it.
Okay, so there's
and-
no real solution there. Right.
And more to the point, we've got an agreement that their reserve can't drop below 1 month's usage, so if you do take that out, you're going to have to put it back the next year, like 2 weeks later.
Unless they adjust the budget, which is why I haven't taken it out. I mean, it was always meant to be one fund, you know, one town, one fund. I think this last couple of years of stress has definitely affected the situation.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
The one book, one town thing works much better, I have to say. Not as controversial. Can I ask you a question, Mary, in regard to the, I guess it's the risk management fund. When the town settles a claim, but we pay it over several years under an agreement, where is that accrued amount in. It's like, for example, in this risk management fund, if there was a claim settled last year and it said that in each year we had to pay $50,000, is that built into that number?
It is, I believe it is by Mr. Saxel. And you know,
In the
I have
accrual-
to
in the
say,
accrual.
sometimes there are settlements on claims that I don't know about until they're settled.
But Dick kind of gives an accrual list of the things, and if there's a big one, you know, I mean, if it's
And
20,000.
we know,
probably-
we get a letter saying a claim is settled, and there's this money that has to be claimed, paid out over a period of years. And then we would keep that letter on file, and when we put the budget together, we would look to make
We
sure that
we
that money
received a
was
letter
counted.
today, and it's public record on the Fairfield Woods settlement.
Yes.
In which check was cut this afternoon for the first half of that. Under the agreement, there's be a payment due in early July, and it's more an accounting issue, and that may be a liability held against it, but it certainly doesn't reduce cash.
No, I guess
I haven't experienced a lot of claims that have many-year payouts. Usually it's 2 or 3 years, and that's pretty easy.
How many are hanging out there right now? Like, for how much of this money, I guess I'm trying to figure, is
Is encumbered already?
On general liability,
Sure. Why don't we start there?
I'd first say that I think if we were to discuss that, I'd rather go into executive session to discuss it, because that's a confidential number between the town attorney and myself and the auditors.
But I have a feeling just.
And it's
I've
done
checked,
on
I
a
believe it's well
case-by-case
under 6
basis. There is a
figures.
miscellaneous account.
It's not a big
Uh,
number,
you know,
to my knowledge.
These two boards met a couple of weeks ago with the town attorney and discussed a couple of matters, but there are others that I'd rather discuss in executive session.
Are you okay for now?
I'm good for now, but I'd like to readdress this at some point if the town attorney's going to be present for another matter to take that up.
Okay. I have a thought that I want to go over with you. Yeah, Mary?
Could I follow up on Jim's question?
Sure.
Does another board approve those settlements? Like, do they go to the RTM for approval?
Board of Selectmen.
Or Board of Selectmen? Okay.
Okay. So here's where we stand, and then I do have a thought for Thursday that came to me while we were here tonight, or Wednesday, rather. My apologies. So, risk
I
management.
remind the chairman that Thursday is St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, exactly. And I will not be doing this.
Won't be able. Might go quicker.
Risk management, we have an issue with the workers' comp area. Town medical, we're okay as it relates to the full year. We're not really addressing prior year's issues as much as we might like. Board of Education, we talked about it, and we've got the total where we've got the issue on the bottom line. That's where this stands right now, okay? We know we followed the recommended counsel of our insurance agents on the town medical, and we followed our plan for the retiree medical on both police and fire and the town medical, right? We've also followed the plans and the recommendations of our actuary on the pension side. So I'm just dealing with and putting together all of our long-term unfunded liabilities to show where we stand and where the hole is. That was my only intent on that. I don't know that we've resolved what we need to do on workers' comp and what we need to do on the internal service fund, but I think we're all agreed that something needs to be done to this fund in the budget. The last item, Mary, if there's nothing further on those items, please.
It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It strikes me as fairly important. Ken passed out, or Paul, a copy of the memo between you and Dr. Clark from a couple of years ago.
I think I passed it out last week.
Yeah, and I read it. I don't have it with me, but I think I remember it properly. And, you know, I think there's two issues with that memo. One is that I think it's questionable as to whether or not there's a lot of enforcement going on that memo. I'm not a lawyer, but the one thing that I thought was interesting, if you read the memo, is that the Board of Ed in the memo pledges might be the wrong word, agrees to properly fund their medical each year.
Based on the
Fully
AON's
fund, based on the Aon.
recommendation.
So the reduction, we've used funny words, withdrawal, the reduction, whatever, of 1.9 million appears to violate the spirit or the letter or the legality of this agreement. And I just think that's something that shouldn't be poo-pooed, since nobody.
That is a question that we've submitted to the town attorney for clarification on, whether that is indeed the case, not being, several members have expressed that, as has Mr. Flato has expressed that. So I've asked the town attorneys to take a look at that, to see what their view is as relates to that memo. And my understanding is that review is ongoing.
Thank you.
Sure. Seeing nothing else on that, the last item is heart and hypertension. And this is, again, one of those items where we have an outside expert who provides us with their best available information on what they believe the claims will be for the next fiscal year. And Ms. Mariles, my understanding is you have an estimate, a revised
Yes,
estimate.
I have a revised estimate. Revised estimate is $652,000, 186. And again, it goes to 330 or 340,000 of that $650,000 number goes to widows' benefits. If someone has a heart attack, has surgery, has anything in a given year that's major, one serious heart operation can put that number way over budget. There are many, many people who have accepted heart and hypertension claims, both active and retirees. And so we budget, again, on what our experience is, on what our pay is. You know, people, it spikes all over the place, but it smooths out. But it's a very difficult budget to guarantee that you can come in. This year, it appears, if it continues for the next 5 months, to be doing exactly what we thought it should do. But again, it's very hard to budget for this particular line.
So the 652, you have 595 in the budget right now, which would give us a shortfall of 57,000. Is the 652 a revised estimate?
It is, and it is staying consistent with the 32-month schedule. So if you're going to use one,
Always go the right way, don't they?
if you're going to use it
No, I shouldn't
for workers' comp, it was staying consistent.
Okay. So that is the 32-month estimate.
Yes.
Any questions on that number? Seeing none. Thank you. One item that we've held over, we went into executive private session or private executive session, whatever you call it, to review kind of the status of our contracts, our negotiations, in as much detail as was possible. And Mr. Walsh has the further comments or questions on risk management that you were just talking about. I was wondering, and this is last minute, but should we get together a half an hour early on Wednesday evening, which would put us at 6:30, an ungodly early hour, and maybe you can't do it because of your Board of Selectmen
If
meeting.
it's okay, I think the idea is great, but I would ask possibly, our meeting's going to go at least an hour and a half.
Yeah. And then you have documents to get done,
Besides the
right?
capital improvement, and now Noel called today with a small item he wanted to come. I just think we're going to need a half an hour between meetings.
I think I agree, I forgot about that. Can you start earlier?
I can start earlier. I don't know the rest of the board.
Sandwich with us?
Yeah, or two.
I mean, we could, we could try to start earlier. All right. All right, I'll tell you what, why don't we, you'd have to notice it tomorrow.
Would you guys be okay with that?
Notice it tomorrow.
I mean,
Starting
the
at
other-
6:30?
I guess I was just going to say, does it matter whether it's,
Can't.
but does it really matter whether it's Wednesday or next Monday?
I have
be the 22nd?
kids from Denmark staying.
Yeah, actually, it can be the 22nd. It's a fair point. We can do it the 22nd.
I mean, I think
Thank
that
you,
might be
Mike.
easier if that's.
All right, let's do it on the 22nd. So we'll
still start a
take the
little
first half hour on the 22nd
At 6:30,
at 6:30.
that's fine,
And we'll,
with Mr. Saxel.
with Mr. Saxel. We can actually do it at 7.
Is the arts here?
We can actually do it at 7. Yeah, I was just thinking out loud here, we could do it at 7. So let's do it at 7 on the 22nd, go into private executive session. I think there's some additional information on some of our questions that we had in the last executive session, and I think we can address Mr. Walsh's issue. Does that work?
Speaking is,
7 PM on the 22nd, we're just going to go
So are we going to have our entire contingency discussion in executive session?
Yes, one more time. We're going to follow up on a couple of our questions.
Speaking of scheduling, you will receive tomorrow via email the notice for the special meeting to vote on the capital projects. Bond counsel will be present. I will distribute now the bond resolution as drafted by bond counsel for your review. It includes everything from the original items that were in the budget book, some of which have been removed.
Thank you. Ms. Mariles, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying, Mrs. Mariles. Everyone, the fire department, the fire chief was here earlier in the evening. He dropped off a couple of documents for everybody. If you would just pass by on your way and grab a document, one of each,
It's going to be another
we'll be all set. Do I have a motion?
special meeting. It doesn't relate to this meeting.
Mr. Stone, do I have a second? Second. Mr. Kiley, all in favor? All opposed, abstentions, we're done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. Thank you.